Today, we journey into the blood-soaked streets of Yharnam to explore one of Bloodborne's most enigmatic and tragic figures, Eileen the Crow, the hunter of hunters. Over the next couple hours, we'll uncover her ancient oath, her heartbreaking duty, and the weight of a burden that spans generations. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin this melancholic tale of duty, sacrifice, and the price of hunting those who once stood beside you. Chapter 1. The Ancient Covenant. In the Gothic nightmare of Yharnam, where cobblestone streets run red with blood and the moon hangs heavy with cosmic malice, there exists a sacred oath as old as the hunt itself. This is the covenant of the hunter of hunters, a solemn duty passed down through generations like a cursed inheritance. To understand Eileen the Crow, we must first understand the terrible responsibility she carries upon her shoulders. The Hunter of Hunters covenant represents one of Bloodborne's most profound ironies. In a world where hunters dedicate their lives to purging the beast scourge from Yharnam streets, there must exist those willing to hunt the hunters themselves when they inevitably succumb to the very corruption they sought to destroy. For the hunt is a double-edged blade, one that cuts both ways. The more a hunter delves into the darkness, the more that darkness seeps into their soul. The blade of mercy, passed down to each hunter of hunters for generations, tells us much about the covenant's ancient origins. Forged from the same meteoric iron as Gehrman's legendary burial blade, it bears the complementary name of Mercy, where Gehrman's weapon speaks of funeral rites. Both blades were crafted in the old workshop during that foundational period when Yharnam's hunters first took up arms against the beast scourge. The parallel naming is no coincidence. Where the burial blade grants final rest to beasts, the blade of mercy grants final peace to fallen hunters. This connection to Gehrman and the earliest days of the hunt suggests that the first hunter of hunters must have been among the very first hunters to take up arms in Yharnam. Perhaps they stood second only to Gehrman himself in those formative years when the healing church first recognized the need for armed defenders against the beast plague. But where Gehrman became the mentor and guide for all hunters in the hunter's dream, the first hunter of hunters took upon themselves a far more solitary and thankless burden. The Crow Hunter badge, passed down alongside the Blade of Mercy, reveals the strict requirements for inheritance of this duty. Only hunters who avoid blood drunkenness while still respecting the blood-drunk comrades they must hunt can inherit the covenant. This creates a paradox of character. The hunter of hunters must possess the strength and skill to slay corrupted hunters, yet retain enough compassion to mourn their necessity. They must be executioner and priest in equal measure. The description of the badge speaks of quiet passage from generation to generation, usually to an outsider from the hinterlands. This tradition of selecting foreigners serves multiple purposes. An outsider lacks the personal connections that might stay their hand when a childhood friend or mentor succumbs to blood drunkenness. They bring fresh perspective unclouded by local politics or church doctrine. Most importantly, they stand apart from Yharnam's endemic corruption, making them less susceptible to the very madness they're meant to police. But perhaps most telling is the reference to the hinterlands, remote areas beyond civilization's reach. This suggests the Hunter of Hunters covenant actively seeks those who understand frontier justice, those accustomed to making hard choices without the luxury of appealing to higher authorities. In the lawless spaces between civilized lands, one learns that sometimes mercy comes at the edge of a blade. The covenant's emphasis on sky burial traditions reveals another layer of its origins. The first hunter of hunters came from a culture that considered Yharnam's ground burial practices blasphemous. In their homeland, the dead were given to the sky, left exposed on high places for carrion birds to clean the bones and carry the soul heavenward. This practice reflected a belief that the spirit must be freed from earthly flesh to find peace in whatever realm awaits beyond. When the first hunter of hunters donned crow feathers and took up their blade, they weren't simply choosing an intimidating disguise. They were embodying their sacred function as psychopomp, the guide who shepherds souls from one realm to the next. Like the carrion birds of their homeland, they would cleanse the bodies of fallen hunters, freeing their spirits from the corruption that had claimed their flesh. This spiritual dimension elevates the hunter of hunters beyond mere executioner. They serve as both judge and priest, determining when a hunter has crossed the line into irredeemable corruption and then performing the sacred rites that grant them final peace. It's a burden that requires not just martial prowess, but deep wisdom and unshakable moral conviction. Yet for all its noble intentions, the Covenant carries within it the seeds of its own tragedy. Each hunter of hunters walks a razor's edge between duty and despair. They must witness the corruption of their peers, steel themselves to kill those who once stood beside them in battle, and do so knowing that they too may one day face the same fate. It's no wonder that the duty is passed down quietly. Who would willingly shoulder such a burden if they truly understood its weight? The loneliness of the position cannot be overstated. While other hunters may find camaraderie in shared hunts and common purpose, the hunter of hunters stands forever apart. They cannot fully trust their peers, knowing they may one day be called upon to end them. They cannot seek comfort in the very institution they serve, for the healing church's own corruption runs deep. They walk their path in isolation, with only their duty as companion. This isolation extends beyond the emotional to the practical. The hunter of hunters operates in the shadows, avoiding notice until the moment they strike. Unlike the church hunters who march openly through Yharnam's streets, or the powder kegs who announce their presence with explosive fanfare, the hunter of hunters works in secret. Their targets must not see them coming, for a blood-drunk hunter is still a hunter. Deadly, skilled, and desperate when cornered. The Covenant's methods reflect this need for stealth and surprise. The Blade of Mercy excels at swift, precise strikes rather than prolonged combat. Its transformed state splits into twin blades that emphasize speed and agility over raw power. This design philosophy extends to the hunter of hunters' overall approach: quick, decisive action to end threats before they can spread or call for aid. But perhaps the most tragic aspect of the Covenant lies in its ultimate futility. No matter how skilled or dedicated the hunter of hunters may be, they fight an unwinnable war. The beast scourge continues to spread, claiming new victims with each passing night. For every corrupted hunter they put down, 2 more may fall to the same madness. They are a finger in the dike, holding back an ocean of corruption through sheer force of will. This futility becomes clear when we examine the broader context of Yharnam's decline. The Healing Church's own leadership has succumbed to cosmic madness, transforming into great ones, or pursuing transcendence through horrific rituals. The beast scourge itself stems from the old blood administered by the Church, making every hunter a potential vector for the very corruption they fight against. In such circumstances, the hunter of hunters becomes less a solution than a symptom, a desperate measure to contain damage that cannot truly be healed. Yet still they persist, bound by duty and honor to continue their thankless vigil. Each successive hunter of hunters takes up the blade knowing they follow in the footsteps of those who came before, those who served until age or injury forced them to pass on the burden. It's a chain of service stretching back to the earliest days of the hunt, each link forged from sacrifice and tempered by loss. The weight of this history presses down upon each new inheritor of the Covenant. They don't simply carry a weapon and a badge. They carry the accumulated sorrow of all who came before. Every blood-drunk hunter slain, every friend turned enemy, every moment of doubt and despair, all of it becomes part of the Covenant's legacy, a spiritual inheritance that grows heavier with each passing generation. In this context, Eileen the Crow emerges not as a single tragic figure, but as the latest in a long line of tragic figures. She stands at the end of a chain of sorrow that stretches back to the very foundations of the hunt. To understand her story, we must understand that she carries within herself the echoes of all who came before, their victories, their failures, their pain, and their sacrifice. The ancient covenant of the Hunter of Hunters represents both the noblest and most heartbreaking aspect of Bloodborne's world. It embodies the idea that even in the depths of cosmic horror and moral corruption, there remain those willing to sacrifice everything for duty and honor, yet it also demonstrates the ultimate futility of fighting against forces too vast and alien for human comprehension. The Hunter of Hunters stands as a monument to both human nobility and human tragedy, a beacon of light in the darkness, even as that darkness slowly consumes everything around it. Chapter 2. The Foreigner's Burden. To truly understand Eileen the Crow, we must recognize her as part of a deliberate tradition, the selection of outsiders to bear the burden of the Hunter of Hunters covenant. Like all who came before her, Eileen hails not from Yharnam itself, but from some distant land beyond the hinterlands. This foreign origin is not merely biographical detail, but fundamental to her character and her ability to perform her grim duty. The wisdom of choosing outsiders for this role becomes clear when we consider the intimate nature of Yharnam's hunter community. These are not faceless soldiers, but individuals who have fought side by side against the Beast Scourge, who have shared the unique bond that forms between those who face death together night after night. For a native Yharnamite to take up the Blade of Mercy would mean potentially hunting their childhood friends, their mentors, their protégés. Such personal connections would make the already difficult task of executing corrupted hunters nearly impossible. Eileen brings the outsider's perspective, emotional distance that allows for clear judgment when that judgment must be final. She can see patterns of corruption that locals might rationalize or excuse. She can act decisively when action is needed, unencumbered by the weight of personal history. Yet this same distance that makes her effective also ensures her isolation. She walks among Yharnam's hunters, but never truly belongs to their brotherhood. Her foreign origin may explain her distinctive approach to dealing with the dead. The crow motif she adopts likely reflects cultural practices from her homeland, though the specific details remain speculative. Where Yharnam's dead are buried in consecrated ground or entombed in elaborate catacombs, it's theorized that Eileen's people may have practiced sky burial, exposing the dead to the elements and carrion birds to ensure the soul's proper passage to the afterlife. This potential cultural difference would represent more than mere custom. It could reflect a fundamentally different understanding of death and its meaning. To Yharnam's citizens, burial represents rest and preservation, a way of honoring the dead by maintaining their physical form. To Eileen's people, such practices trap the soul in earthly flesh, preventing its natural ascension. When she takes on the appearance of a crow, she doesn't simply intimidate her targets. She offers them spiritual liberation from the corruption that has claimed their bodies. The practical implications of this worldview shape everything about how Eileen approaches her duty. She sees the blood-drunk hunters she must slay, not as fallen comrades to be mourned, but as imprisoned souls crying out for release. Her blade becomes an instrument of mercy rather than execution, freeing the trapped spirit from its corrupted vessel. This perspective allows her to perform her grim work without descending into despair or self-loathing. Yet Eileen's status as an outsider also creates unique vulnerabilities. She lacks the deep understanding of Yharnam's politics and hidden agendas that might help her anticipate threats. She cannot call upon networks of loyalty and obligation that sustain other hunters. When she faces challenges beyond her ability to handle alone, she has nowhere to turn for aid except the random kindness of strangers. This isolation becomes particularly apparent when we examine her interactions with the player character. Here is another outsider, another foreigner drawn to Yharnam by circumstances beyond their control. In the player, Eileen recognizes a kindred spirit, someone who shares her fundamental displacement from Yharnam's social fabric. Their initial meeting carries undertones of mutual recognition, two outsiders acknowledging their shared condition in subtle glances and carefully chosen words. The bold hunter's marks she offers serve as more than mere gameplay convenience. They represent her attempt to provide the same kind of guidance she wished she had received when first arriving in Yharnam. Having navigated the treacherous waters of foreign expectations and unspoken rules, she tries to spare the player some of the confusion and danger she herself experienced. It's a small kindness, but one that speaks to her fundamental decency despite the harshness of her profession. Eileen's foreign perspective also grants her clarity about Yharnam's true nature that many natives lack. She can see the rot at the heart of the healing church, the cosmic horror underlying the beast scourge, the ultimate futility of the hunt itself. This knowledge weighs heavily upon her, yet also prevents her from being drawn into the various delusions and denial mechanisms that allow Yharnam's citizens to function in their mad world. Her observations about the hunt reveal this outsider's insight. When she warns that hunters will inevitably become beasts themselves, she speaks from the perspective of someone who has seen the pattern repeated countless times. She understands what the locals refuse to acknowledge, that the hunt doesn't cure Yharnam's curse but perpetuates it, creating an endless cycle of violence and corruption that consumes all who participate. This understanding extends to her view of her own role within the cycle. She knows that her duty as hunter of hunters merely treats symptoms rather than causes, that for every corrupted hunter she slays, the underlying forces that created that corruption remain unchanged. Yet she continues her work because someone must, because the alternative is allowing the corruption to spread unchecked. It's a thankless task performed without illusion about its ultimate effectiveness. The loneliness of her position is compounded by the knowledge that she will never truly belong in Yharnam, no matter how long she remains or how faithfully she serves. She will always be the foreign hunter, the outsider who bears the Covenant's burden. This emotional isolation mirrors the physical isolation inherent in her role. She must work alone, trust no one completely, and be prepared to strike down anyone who shows signs of corruption. Her age adds another dimension to this isolation. As an older woman in a profession dominated by younger men, she faces additional barriers to acceptance and respect. Her complaints about being too old for the hunt reflect not just physical fatigue, but social marginalization. In a culture that values strength and aggression, her advanced years make her seem obsolete, a relic of earlier times when different values might have held sway. Yet her age also grants her valuable perspective that younger hunters lack. She has seen enough cycles of corruption and purging to understand the long-term patterns that escape those caught up in immediate concerns. Her warnings carry the weight of experience, even when they fall on deaf ears. She knows how these stories end because she has seen them end so many times before. The interaction between her foreign origin and her advanced age creates a unique form of double displacement. She is foreign to Yharnam's culture and foreign to the current generation's assumptions about how the hunt should be conducted. This double outsider status grants her exceptional clarity about the situation's true nature, but also ensures her complete isolation from any source of support or comfort. Her relationship with the Blade of Mercy reflects this complex position. The weapon represents both connection and separation. Connection to the ancient tradition of the Hunter of Hunters, but separation from the mainstream hunter community that views her weapon as strange and unfamiliar. Where other hunters proudly display their church-blessed weapons, Eileen carries a blade that whispers of foreign customs and ancient oaths. The mechanical properties of the Blade of Mercy mirror her position perfectly. It excels at swift, precise strikes, but struggles in prolonged combat. Like Eileen herself, It must rely on speed and timing rather than brute force, striking quickly before opponents can mount an effective defense. The weapon's twin blade transformation reflects the dual nature of her duty, mercy and execution combined in a single instrument. This emphasis on speed and precision extends to her overall approach to the hunt. She cannot afford the luxury of prolonged engagements or dramatic confrontations. Her targets are skilled hunters who would pose significant threats if given time to prepare or call for assistance. Her success depends on appearing suddenly, striking decisively, and disappearing before reinforcements arrive. The psychological toll of this approach cannot be understated. Each target represents not just a threat to be eliminated, but a tragedy to be mourned. Another hunter lost to the corruption that claims them all eventually. Eileen must steel herself to kill not in anger or fear, but in cold calculation of necessity. She must become an instrument of fate itself, guided by duty rather than emotion. Her foreign origin provides some protection against this psychological burden. The cultural distance that prevents her from forming deep bonds with local hunters also prevents her from experiencing their corruption as personal betrayal. She can mourn their loss without feeling personally responsible for their fall. Yet this same distance also denies her the comfort that might come from shared understanding and mutual support. In many ways, Eileen embodies the tragic nobility of the exile, one who serves faithfully despite never being fully accepted, who sacrifices for a community that will never truly embrace her. Her story reflects broader themes about the price of duty and the isolation that comes with bearing responsibility for difficult truths. She stands as a figure of both strength and sadness, carrying her burden with dignity while slowly being crushed beneath its weight. The tradition of selecting foreigners for the Hunter of Hunters Covenant reveals a deep understanding of human nature and social dynamics. Only someone with sufficient emotional distance can perform such a role effectively. Yet that same distance ensures their permanent isolation. It's a cruel calculus that sacrifices the individual's happiness for the community's protection, creating heroes who can never be fully appreciated by those they serve. Chapter 3. The Weight of Years. When we first encounter Eileen the Crow in the shadowy rafters of central Yharnam, we meet a hunter already bearing the accumulated weight of countless years in service to her grim covenant. She is not the bright-eyed novice taking up arms for the first time, nor the seasoned veteran at the height of her powers. Instead, we meet an aging warrior near the end of a long and thankless career, her body and spirit worn down by decades of hunting those who once stood beside her. Her self-deprecating comments about age reveal more than mere physical decline. When she speaks of being too old for this life anymore and references her glory days as long past, she's not simply complaining about creaking joints or slower reflexes. She's acknowledging a fundamental shift in her relationship with the hunt itself. The fire that once drove her to take up the blade of mercy has dimmed to barely glowing embers, sustained more by stubborn duty than passionate conviction. This perspective grants her unique insight into the true nature of the hunt and its inevitable toll on all participants. She has watched entire generations of hunters rise and fall, seen promising young warriors transform into the very beasts they once fought against. Her warnings about the hunt's corrupting influence carry the authority of lived experience. She has seen the pattern repeat itself so many times that its outcome has become grimly predictable. Her advanced age also places her in an unusual position within Yharnam's hunter hierarchy. Most hunters don't live long enough to grow old. They die in battle against beasts, succumb to blood drunkenness, or simply disappear into the night never to return. Those few who do survive long enough to show their years typically retreat from active hunting, becoming mentors or administrators rather than continuing to fight on the front lines. Eileen, by contrast, continues her deadly work despite her advancing years. This dedication speaks to both her extraordinary skill and her unshakable sense of duty. She cannot simply retire and pass on her responsibilities to another, for the Hunter of Hunters covenant allows only one bearer at a time. Until she finds a suitable successor, she must continue her vigil regardless of personal cost. The physical toll of this extended service becomes apparent in her movements and fighting style. She relies increasingly on precision and timing, rather than brute force or sustained aggression. Her attacks come in swift, economical bursts designed to end fights quickly before her stamina gives out. She cannot afford prolonged combat or multiple engagements without rest. Each fight might be her last if she miscalculates or allows an opponent to exploit her diminished reserves. Yet her age also grants her advantages that younger hunters lack. Her experience allows her to read opponents with uncanny accuracy, anticipating their moves and exploiting weaknesses that less seasoned fighters might miss. She has faced every type of corrupted hunter, learned the signs that precede their transformation, and developed strategies for dealing with each variety of blood-drunk madness. This expertise extends beyond combat to investigation and tracking. Finding corrupted hunters requires understanding their psychology, knowing where they might go, what they might do, how they might try to hide their condition. Eileen's years of experience have taught her to recognize the subtle signs of encroaching madness, the small behavioral changes that precede dramatic transformation. Her reputation within Yharnam's hunter community reflects this accumulated expertise. Even those who have never met her know of the Crow, the mysterious figure who appears when hunters go missing or behave strangely. Some fear her as an omen of doom, others respect her as a necessary guardian of their profession's integrity. All recognize her as a force to be reckoned with, despite her apparent frailty. The psychological impact of her long service cannot be overstated. She has killed more hunters than most have ever met, each death weighing upon her conscience despite the necessity of her actions. The accumulated guilt and sorrow of these killings has shaped her into someone who finds little joy in life, who speaks with the weary cadence of one who has seen too much suffering. Her occasional displays of dark humor serve as a coping mechanism for this psychological burden. When she makes sardonic observations about the hunt or Yharnam's denizens, she's using humor to create distance from the horror that surrounds her. It's a survival strategy that allows her to function despite the overwhelming sadness of her situation. The isolation inherent in her role has been compounded by years of enforced solitude. She has watched potential friends and allies succumb to corruption, forcing her to maintain emotional distance from everyone she encounters. This defensive mechanism has become so ingrained that she struggles to form genuine connections even when the opportunity presents itself. Her interaction with the player character represents a rare moment of openness in what has become a life of necessary isolation. In recognizing another outsider struggling to navigate Yharnam's treacherous environment, she allows herself a moment of genuine human connection. Her gifts of bold hunter's marks and protective advice stem from this recognition. A brief glimpse of the caring person she might have been under different circumstances. The knowledge that her time is running short adds urgency to her remaining work. She cannot continue indefinitely, and the prospect of dying before finding a suitable successor weighs heavily upon her thoughts. The Hunter of Hunters Covenant cannot be allowed to die with her. Too much depends upon its continuation for her to accept such an outcome. This pressure to find and train a replacement colors her assessment of every hunter she encounters. She watches for signs of the qualities needed to bear the Covenant's burden. Strength without bloodthirst, judgment without cruelty, dedication without fanaticism. The rarity of such combinations explains why the position passes down so infrequently, and why current bearers often serve far longer than their physical capabilities might suggest. Her growing physical limitations force her to be increasingly selective about which targets to pursue. She can no longer afford to hunt every corrupted hunter in Yharnam. She must focus on those who pose the greatest immediate threat or whose corruption might spread to others. This triage approach represents a practical adaptation to her declining capabilities, but it also means allowing some corruption to go unchecked. The weight of these compromises adds to her psychological burden. Each corrupted hunter she allows to continue operating represents a failure of her duty, even when that failure stems from practical necessity rather than lack of will. She carries the guilt of these unavoidable choices, alongside the guilt of all the hunters she has been forced to kill. Her relationship with the hunter's dream adds another layer of complexity to her situation. Unlike the player character, she no longer dreams, and thus cannot benefit from the supernatural resilience and guidance that the dream provides to active hunters. This disconnection leaves her more vulnerable, but also more clear-eyed about the hunt's true nature, freed from the compelling influence of Gehrman and the moon presence. The loss of her connection to the dream represents both liberation and abandonment. She is free to see the hunt clearly, without the comforting illusions that sustain younger hunters. But she also lacks the supernatural support that makes such dangerous work survivable. She must rely solely on her own skill and experience, with no safety net to catch her if she falls. This isolation from the dream's influence allows her to serve as a unique perspective on the hunt's true nature. She can warn the player about dangers that Gehrman might downplay or ignore, offer guidance unfiltered by the dream's agenda. Her advice carries particular weight because it comes from someone no longer under the dream's sway. Her advanced age also grants her perspective on the cyclical nature of Yharnam's problems. She has seen the beast scourge, wax and wane, witnessed the rise and fall of various church factions, observed the slow corruption of institutions that once seemed pure and noble. This long view allows her to understand that current events fit into larger patterns, that the hunt itself is part of a cycle that has repeated throughout Yharnam's history. Yet this understanding also contributes to her fatalism about the possibility of meaningful change. She has seen too many attempts at reform fail, too many promises of a better way proven hollow. Her warnings about the hunt's futility stem from this hard-won knowledge. She knows how these stories end because she has lived through their repetition. The approach of her own end adds poignancy to every interaction and decision. She is writing the final chapter of her story, knowing that each choice might be her last chance to make a meaningful impact. This knowledge lends weight to her words and urgency to her actions, as she tries to accomplish whatever good she can in the time remaining to her. Chapter 4. The Art of Mercy. The Blade of Mercy that Eileen carries represents far more than a mere weapon. It embodies a philosophy of death that stands in stark contrast to the brutal efficiency favoured by most of Yharnam's hunters, where others wield crude saws and crushing hammers designed to tear through beast flesh with maximum damage. Eileen's weapon speaks to precision, grace, and the gentle passage from life to death that its name implies. Forged from the same meteoric iron as Gehrman's burial blade, the Blade of Mercy shares a cosmic heritage that hints at its true purpose. This is not a tool of war, but an instrument of ritual, crafted to perform sacred duties that transcend mere combat. The meteoric origin suggests connection to celestial forces, to powers beyond the terrestrial concerns that drive most hunter weaponry. The weapon's design philosophy reflects the cultural traditions Eileen brought with her from her homeland. In her people's sky burial practices, death was not viewed as violent termination, but as gentle transition, the soul's release from earthly bonds to journey toward whatever realm awaited beyond. The Blade of Mercy carries this same philosophy into combat, offering clean, precise strikes that minimize suffering while maximizing efficiency. When transformed into its twin blade configuration, the weapon reveals its true nature as an instrument of divine judgment. The splitting mechanism doesn't simply double the weapon's cutting power. It creates a ritualistic duality that reflects the twin aspects of Eileen's duty. One blade represents the ending of corruption, the other the beginning of peace. Together, they perform the sacred act of separation that frees the trapped soul from its fallen vessel. The weapon's emphasis on speed and agility over raw damage speaks to a deeper understanding of combat psychology. Corrupted hunters retain their skills and instincts even after succumbing to blood drunkenness, making them extremely dangerous opponents for anyone who tries to match them in straightforward battle. The Blade of Mercy's design philosophy recognizes this reality, emphasizing surprise and precision over prolonged engagement. Eileen's mastery of this weapon represents decades of practice and refinement. She has learned to read the microscopic tells that precede an opponent's attacks, to exploit the momentary openings that faster weapons can capitalize upon. Her fighting style resembles a deadly dance more than conventional combat, with each movement flowing naturally into the next, in sequences practiced to the point of instinct. The throwing knives she employs alongside the blade add another dimension to her tactical arsenal. These secondary weapons serve multiple purposes, disrupting opponent movements, maintaining pressure at range, and providing alternative options when direct engagement proves too risky. Their use requires exceptional accuracy and timing, skills that can only be developed through years of dedicated practice. Her preference for these traditional weapons over the more exotic armaments favored by other hunter factions reflects both practical considerations and philosophical commitments. The Church's workshop produces increasingly elaborate weapons designed to deal with ever more dangerous beasts, but such tools often prove unwieldy in the precision work that defines the Hunter of Hunters mission. Corrupted hunters require surgical intervention, not overwhelming force. The ritualistic aspects of her combat style extend beyond weapon choice to encompass her entire approach to confrontation. She doesn't simply attack her targets. She performs a ceremony of judgment and execution that honors both the corruption being ended and the person who once bore it. This perspective allows her to maintain her humanity despite the necessity of repeatedly killing former allies. Her crow-themed attire reinforces these ritualistic elements while serving practical purposes. The feathered mantle and beaked mask create an intimidating silhouette that can end fights before they begin, particularly against corrupted hunters whose minds have been addled by blood drunkenness. The psychological impact of her appearance often proves as effective as her physical skills. The mask's design draws inspiration from the protective gear worn by plague doctors in her homeland's distant past. These medical practitioners understood that protection from contamination required more than physical barriers. It demanded symbolic separation from the diseases they treated. Eileen's mask serves similar functions, protecting her not just from bloodborne pathogens, but from the spiritual corruption that proximity to madness can spread. Her movement patterns reflect training in assassination techniques rather than conventional hunter tactics. Where most hunters rely on aggressive frontal assaults backed by superior firepower, Eileen emphasizes stealth, misdirection, and surprise. Her targets rarely see her coming until it's too late to mount an effective defense. This emphasis on stealth serves multiple purposes beyond tactical advantage. Corrupted hunters often retain enough awareness to recognize the threat she represents, and given warning, they might flee rather than fight. Some might even attempt to corrupt other hunters before their own destruction, spreading the madness she seeks to contain. Quick, decisive action prevents such complications. The precision required for her work extends beyond combat to encompass investigation and preparation. Identifying corrupted hunters requires careful observation of behavioral patterns, social dynamics, and subtle physical changes that precede full transformation. Eileen has developed an expert's eye for these warning signs, allowing her to act before corruption reaches its final stages. Her understanding of hunter psychology proves crucial to this investigative work. She knows how hunters think, what drives them, where they might go when madness begins to cloud their judgment. This knowledge allows her to anticipate her target's actions and position herself accordingly, often arriving at locations before the corrupted hunters she pursues. The emotional discipline required to maintain this level of professional detachment represents perhaps the greatest challenge of her calling. Each target was once a person with hopes, dreams, and relationships, someone who took up arms against the beast scourge with noble intentions. Recognizing this humanity while still performing her duty requires a kind of psychological compartmentalization that few could sustain over years of service. Her method of delivering death reflects this recognition of her target's former humanity. The precise strikes of the Blade of Mercy aim for vital points that ensure quick unconsciousness followed by rapid death, minimizing pain and terror. She doesn't simply kill corrupted hunters, she grants them mercy in its truest form, ending their suffering while honoring what they once were. The physical techniques she employs draw from multiple martial traditions, suggesting extensive training before she took up the Hunter of Hunters covenant. Her footwork shows influences from formal dueling styles. Her blade work incorporates elements of ceremonial swordplay, and her overall approach demonstrates familiarity with both military and civilian combat systems. This eclectic background serves her well in dealing with the variety of opponents she faces. Corrupted hunters come from many different schools and traditions, each bringing their own strengths and weaknesses to combat. Her diverse training allows her to adapt her approach to counter each opponent's particular style and preferred tactics. The maintenance and care she lavishes upon her weapons reflects deep respect for their role in her sacred duty. The Blade of Mercy receives meticulous attention to keep its edge sharp and its mechanisms functioning smoothly. Her throwing knives are balanced and weighted to precise specifications. Every piece of equipment serves not just as a tool, but as an extension of her will and purpose. Her relationship with these weapons has evolved over years of shared service into something approaching spiritual communion. She knows exactly how each blade will feel in her hand, precisely how the throwing knives will fly, instinctively where to place her strikes for maximum effect. This intimate familiarity allows her to perform in combat with an economy of motion that conserves energy while maximizing impact. The philosophical underpinnings of her combat style reflect broader themes about the nature of mercy and justice in Bloodborne's morally complex world. Where others might see only violence and death, Eileen performs acts of compassion disguised as execution. Her blade cuts through corruption to reveal the trapped soul beneath, offering liberation from torments that no other intervention could address. This perspective transforms every confrontation from simple combat into sacred ritual. Each victory not a triumph of violence, but an act of healing that restores balance to the world. Through her art of mercy, Eileen serves as both warrior and priest, executioner and healer, bringing peace to those who can find it nowhere else. Chapter 5. The Hunter's Mark. When Eileen first encounters the player character in those shadowy rafters above central Yharnam's sewers, she immediately recognizes something that others might miss: another outsider, another foreign soul drawn into Yharnam's web of blood and madness. Her immediate assessment cuts through any pretense or confusion. "Oh, a hunter are ye? And an outsider? What a mess you've been caught up in." These words carry layers of meaning that extend far beyond simple observation. In identifying the player as both hunter and outsider, she establishes a fundamental kinship that will define their relationship throughout the nightmare to come. She sees in this newcomer something of herself: the disorientation of arriving in a foreign land, the gradual realization of the true scope of the horror that has consumed Yharnam, the slow understanding that there may be no escape from the role they've been thrust into. Her gift of bold hunter's marks represents more than mere practical assistance. These items, which allow hunters to return safely to their last sanctuary, embody her attempt to provide the guidance she wished she had received when first arriving in Yharnam years earlier. Having navigated the treacherous waters of foreign customs and unspoken rules, she recognizes the vulnerability that comes with being an outsider in a hostile environment. The The marks themselves carry symbolic weight beyond their mechanical function. They represent the possibility of retreat, of stepping back from overwhelming situations to reassess and regroup. For hunters caught up in the blood-drunk frenzy of the hunt, such items can mean the difference between measured progress and reckless destruction. Eileen understands that survival in Yharnam requires knowing when to advance and when to withdraw. Her warning about the night being particularly dangerous proves prophetic in ways that may not be immediately apparent. This is not merely the general caution one might offer to any newcomer, but specific intelligence based on her unique position within Yharnam's hunter hierarchy. As the hunter of hunters, she has access to information about corrupted hunters that others might not possess, knowledge of where they operate, when they're most active, and what makes certain nights more dangerous than others. The gesture she teaches, "Shake Off Cape," carries cultural significance that reflects her foreign origins. In her homeland, such movements might have served ritual purposes, ways of warding off evil influences, or preparing for spiritual challenges. In Yharnam's context, the gesture serves as both practical preparation for combat and symbolic rejection of the corruption that seeps through the city's very stones. Her immediate establishment of this mentor-student dynamic reveals aspects of her character that her grim profession might otherwise obscure. Despite years of hunting corrupted hunters, she retains enough humanity to care about the welfare of strangers. The maternal concern she shows toward the player character suggests reserves of compassion that her duty hasn't completely exhausted. Yet her warnings also carry undertones of fatalism that reflect her long experience with Yharnam's cycles of corruption and destruction. When she speaks of beasts all over the shop, she's not simply describing the immediate threat posed by transformed citizens. She's acknowledging the fundamental nature of the beast scourge, its inevitability, its persistence, and its tendency to claim everyone who remains in Yharnam long enough. Her assessment of the player's situation proves remarkably accurate despite their brief interaction. She recognizes not just another hunter, but specifically an outsider hunter, someone with the perspective and emotional distance necessary to see Yharnam's problems clearly. This recognition suggests her ability to read people extends beyond identifying corruption to encompassing the subtler qualities that might make someone suitable for difficult tasks. The location of their first meeting carries its own significance. These rafters above the sewers represent liminal space, neither fully part of Yharnam's civilized areas nor completely separate from them. It's fitting that the hunter of hunters would operate in such borderlands, existing on the margins of the community she serves. Her presence here also suggests careful observation of the city's entry points, monitoring who comes and goes. Her decision to reveal herself to the player character, rather than remaining hidden as she might with other hunters, indicates a calculated assessment of their potential value. She doesn't simply offer aid to every newcomer. Her resources are too limited and her position too precarious for such generosity. The assistance she provides represents an investment in what she hopes might prove to be an ally in the struggles ahead. The casual manner in which she discusses Yharnam's transformation reveals the psychological adaptations necessary for survival in such an environment. What would horrify newcomers has become routine background reality for her. This emotional numbing serves as protection against despair, but it also highlights the toll that extended exposure to horror takes on the human psyche. Her warning to prepare yourself for the worst operates on multiple levels. On the surface, it refers to the immediate dangers posed by the beast-transformed citizens prowling Yharnam's streets. More deeply, it acknowledges the psychological and spiritual challenges that await anyone who chooses to take up arms in this cursed city. The worst isn't simply death or injury, it's the corruption of everything that makes life meaningful. The emphasis she places on the player's outsider status reflects her understanding of the advantages such perspective provides. Outsiders see patterns that locals miss, question assumptions that natives take for granted, and remain unencumbered by loyalties that might compromise judgment. These qualities make them both valuable allies and potential threats, depending on how they choose to employ their insights. Her immediate recognition of the player's hunter status suggests familiarity with the markers that distinguish hunters from ordinary citizens. Perhaps it's something in their bearing, their equipment, or simply the way they move through dangerous territory. This ability to instantly categorize individuals proves crucial to her survival in a role that requires quick assessments of threat levels and potential responses. The brevity of their initial interaction reflects both practical concerns and emotional protection. As someone who has watched countless hunters succumb to corruption, she cannot afford to become too attached to any individual. Her kindness has limits imposed by necessity. She can offer guidance and assistance, but she cannot take responsibility for the choices others make with that help. Her positioning in this liminal space between Yharnam's civilized areas and its wild margins mirrors her role within the hunter community itself. She operates on the boundaries, observing from the shadows, intervening only when necessary. This liminal existence allows her to maintain the perspective necessary for her duties, while avoiding the entanglements that might compromise her effectiveness. The timing of their meeting proves significant as well. She encounters the player at the very beginning of their journey through Yharnam, before they've had time to form strong attachments or develop loyalties that might cloud their judgment. This early contact allows her to plant seeds of awareness that might prove crucial in later encounters. Her assessment of the situation's hopelessness: there are no humans left, they're all flesh-hungry beasts now, reflects not just immediate observation, but accumulated experience with Yharnam's cycles of destruction. She has seen the beast scourge consume entire districts, watched the gradual transformation of familiar faces into monstrous forms. Her words carry the weight of witnessed apocalypse. Yet despite this apparent hopelessness, her decision to aid the player suggests reserves of determination that her pessimistic words might belie. Perhaps she sees in this newcomer possibilities that previous encounters have failed to offer. Perhaps she recognizes qualities that might allow them to succeed where others have failed. Or perhaps she simply cannot bring herself to abandon someone else to face Yharnam's horrors alone. The hunter's marks she provides represent more than emergency transportation. They embody the wisdom of experience, the understanding that survival sometimes requires tactical retreat. In a culture that often glorifies mindless aggression and endless advancement, her gift of retreat options represents mature wisdom about the true nature of combat and survival. Her role as informal mentor to the player character establishes patterns that will define their relationship throughout the challenges ahead. She offers guidance without demanding obedience, provides assistance without creating obligation, and shares wisdom without claiming authority. This approach reflects her understanding that each hunter must ultimately choose their own path through the maze of moral and practical challenges that define life in Yharnam. Chapter 6: Shadows of the Cathedral Ward. As the player's journey through Yharnam progresses, and they unlock the gates leading to the Cathedral Ward, they may encounter Eileen again in a very different context. Gone is the relatively safe environment of their first meeting. Now she stands in the shadow of Udorn Chapel, her attention focused on darker matters that speak to the core of her grim profession. The Cathedral Ward represents the heart of the Healing Church's power, a district where religious authority intersects with political control and scientific ambition. For Eileen to operate openly in this area requires either exceptional skill at remaining unnoticed or tacit permission from forces that normally brook no interference in their domain. Her presence here suggests that the corruption she tracks has spread even into the church's most sacred precincts. When the player encounters her outside Udorn Chapel, they find her staring intently at the entrance to the tomb of Udorn, the site where Father Gascoigne met his tragic end. This isn't coincidental positioning, but deliberate surveillance of a location that has become significant in ways the average hunter might not understand. The tomb has become something more than a simple burial site. It has become a nexus where the past and present intersect in dangerous ways. Her warning about staying away from the tomb carries urgency that goes beyond general caution. She knows something specific about what lurks there, something that poses a threat not just to the unwary, but to the very foundations of order that keep Yharnam's hunter community functioning. Her use of the gesture, shh, when warning the player suggests the need for discretion that goes beyond simple stealth. Some knowledge is too dangerous to speak aloud. The target of her attention becomes clear through careful observation and investigation. Henrik, the old hunter, has taken up residence in the tomb where his former partner Father Gascoigne fell to beast corruption. This isn't simply a case of a hunter choosing an inconvenient location to rest. It represents a convergence of personal tragedy and professional obligation that epitomizes the moral complexity of Eileen's duty. Henrik's presence in the tomb speaks to grief that has transcended normal mourning and entered the realm of dangerous obsession. His partnership with Father Gascoigne wasn't merely professional, but deeply personal, forged through shared dangers and mutual dependence that created bonds stronger than blood family. The loss of such a partner represents a wound that might never heal, particularly when that loss came through the very corruption they both fought against. The description of Henrik as having lived a tragically long life due to his partnership with Gascoigne reveals layers of meaning that illuminate both characters' histories. In Yharnam's dangerous environment, longevity among hunters typically results from exceptional skill, favorable circumstances, or supernatural intervention. For Henrik, it appears his survival came at the cost of watching those around him succumb to various forms of corruption while he remained untouched. This survival guilt weighs heavily upon hunters who outlive their peers, creating psychological vulnerabilities that the beast scourge can exploit. Henrik's presence at Gascoigne's tomb suggests he may be wrestling with questions about why he survived when his partner didn't, why his skills weren't sufficient to save someone he cared about deeply. Such internal conflicts create openings for the madness that eventually claims most hunters. Eileen's identification of Henrik as her target reveals the tragic irony that defines much of her work. She must hunt someone who became corrupted not through evil intent or moral weakness, but through grief and loyalty taken to destructive extremes. Henrik represents the noble hunter driven mad by the very bonds that once made him strong, transformed from protector into threat by the weight of his own conscience. The yellow garb that Henrik wears serves multiple symbolic functions that speak to his character and situation. Yellow has long been associated with madness in various cultural traditions, but it also represents illumination and enlightenment. For Henrik, the colour might reflect his glimpse into truths too painful to bear. The knowledge that all hunters eventually fall to corruption, that their struggle against the beast scourge serves no ultimate purpose, that everything they sacrifice in service to their duty proves meaningless in the end. His choice of weapons, the saw cleaver and hunter pistol, represents a return to basics that suggests either desperation or deliberate simplification. These are the tools that he and Gascoigne would have used in their early partnership, before specialization and experience led them to more exotic equipment. By reverting to these familiar weapons, he may be attempting to recapture a time when their purpose seemed clear and their cause seemed just. The tactical challenge that Henrik presents reflects both his skills and his unstable mental state. As an old hunter, he possesses decades of experience in combat against both beasts and humans. His techniques have been refined through countless battles, his instincts honed by survival in situations that claimed lesser hunters. Yet his corruption has added unpredictability to his movements, making him dangerous in ways that purely rational opponents never could be. Eileen's assessment of the threat he poses proves accurate when events unfold as they do. Despite her experience and skill, Henrik represents a challenge that pushes her capabilities to their limits. His combination of veteran hunter abilities and blood-drunk unpredictability creates a tactical puzzle that requires more than simple combat prowess to solve. The tomb's symbolic significance adds another layer to the confrontation that awaits there. This is where Father Gascoigne fell to beast corruption, where the player character faced their first true test against a fallen hunter. For Henrik to choose this location as his base of operations suggests either deliberate symbolism or unconscious attraction to the site of his greatest personal tragedy. The atmosphere of the cathedral ward itself contributes to the tension surrounding these events. This district represents the pinnacle of the healing church's temporal power, yet it has become infected with the same corruption that plagues the rest of Yharnam. The giant gatekeepers that patrol its streets have been transformed into barely contained monsters. The very guardians of order become threats to those they were meant to protect. Eileen's ability to operate in this environment without attracting unwanted attention speaks to skills that extend beyond simple combat ability. She must navigate not only physical dangers, but political complexities that could prove equally deadly. The church tolerates no interference in its affairs, yet her mission sometimes requires her to act within their sphere of influence. Her warning to the player about avoiding the tomb reflects both professional courtesy and genuine concern for their welfare. She recognizes that they lack the experience necessary to assess the true danger that Henrik represents. What might appear to be a simple encounter with another hunter could easily become a death trap for someone unprepared for the realities of fighting corrupted former allies. The isolation that Henrik's grief has imposed upon him mirrors the isolation that Eileen's duty requires. Both stand apart from the hunter community that once welcomed them, separated by experiences and knowledge that cannot be shared with those who haven't walked the same dark paths. This parallel creates a tragic kinship between hunter and target that makes the inevitable confrontation all the more poignant. The timing of these events, occurring as they do in the shadow of the cathedral ward's grand architecture, emphasizes the contrast between official religious ceremony and the grim realities of individual suffering. While the church preaches salvation and healing, actual hunters grapple with loss, corruption, and the gradual erosion of everything they once held sacred. Eileen's positioning outside Udon Chapel, rather than within its supposed sanctuary, speaks to her understanding of where true safety lies. The chapel offers physical protection, but cannot guard against the spiritual corruption that poses the greatest threat to hunters. Her vigil in the open acknowledges that some battles must be fought without shelter or comfort. The gesture she teaches, shh, carries implications that extend beyond immediate tactical concerns. In Yharnam's environment, speaking openly about corruption can itself become dangerous, attracting unwanted attention from forces that prefer such matters remain hidden. Discretion becomes not just tactically wise, but essential for survival. Chapter 7. The Burden of Brotherhood. The confrontation that unfolds in the Tomb of Udon represents one of Bloodborne's most emotionally complex encounters, where duty collides with compassion and the player witnesses firsthand the terrible weight that Eileen carries as Hunter of Hunters. When she descends into that shadowed space to face Henrik, she isn't simply pursuing another target. She's confronting the accumulated grief and rage of a broken man whose only crime was loving his partner too deeply. Henrik's presence in the tomb where Father Gascoigne fell creates a narrative symmetry that speaks to the cyclical nature of corruption in Yharnam. Just as Gascoigne succumbed to the beast scourge and had to be put down, now his partner faces a similar fate. The location serves as a monument to the futility of the hunt itself. No matter how skilled or dedicated hunters might be, the corruption eventually claims them all. The old hunter's transformation into a target for the Hunter of Hunters reflects the broader theme of how good intentions can become corrupted when taken to extremes. Henrik's grief over losing his partner has metastasized into something toxic, poisoning his judgment and driving him toward the very madness that claimed Gascoigne. His tragedy lies not in weakness or moral failure, but in the strength of emotions that have become destructive. When Eileen engages Henrik in combat, she faces an opponent who embodies everything she once respected about the hunter profession. His skills have been honed through decades of faithful service, his techniques refined through countless battles against the beast scourge. In many ways, he represents what she herself might have become under different circumstances. A veteran hunter whose experience has curdled into something dangerous. The tactical challenge that Henrik presents forces Eileen to confront her own limitations in ways that her previous encounters may not have. His combination of veteran expertise and unpredictable corruption creates a puzzle that pushes her abilities to their breaking point. The raw gesture he employs isn't simply intimidation, but a release of grief and rage that has been building for far too long. Her struggle against Henrik reveals the physical toll that years of hunting have taken on her aging body. Where once she might have dispatched corrupted hunters with relative ease, now each encounter becomes a test of endurance as well as skill. The precise strikes that once ended fights quickly may no longer prove sufficient against opponents of Henrik's caliber. The throwing knives she employs against him serve multiple purposes beyond simple damage. They allow her to maintain pressure while managing her stamina, create openings for more decisive attacks, and demonstrate the tactical adaptations she's made to compensate for her declining physical capabilities. Each knife thrown represents years of experience distilled into split-second decisions about positioning and timing. If the player chooses to intervene in this confrontation, they witness Eileen's reaction to unexpected assistance in a situation where she expected to fight alone. Her response reveals both gratitude and concern. Gratitude for aid that may have saved her life, but concern about what the player's presence might mean for their own safety and moral development. The successful conclusion of this encounter marks a turning point in the relationship between Eileen and the player character. No longer are they simply mentor and student, but allies who have shared combat against a dangerous foe. This shared experience creates bonds that transcend mere professional courtesy, establishing trust that will prove crucial in the trials ahead. Henrik's death in the tomb, where his partner fell, creates a poetic justice that nonetheless carries tragic undertones. While his corruption has been ended before it could spread to others, his loss represents the breaking of one of the last links to Yharnam's earlier, more hopeful days. With his passing, another piece of the hunt's noble history dies with him. The air rune that Henrik drops upon his death carries symbolic significance that extends beyond its mechanical effects. As an item that increases blood echoes gained from visceral attacks, it represents the way that violence begets more violence, that each death in service to the hunt demands further killing to justify the sacrifice. The rune embodies the cycle of bloodshed that has consumed Yharnam's hunter community. Eileen's acknowledgement of the player's role in Henrik's defeat reveals her understanding of what such violence costs those who participate in it. She recognizes that the player has crossed a threshold by helping to kill another hunter, even one who had become corrupted. This recognition marks their transition from innocent bystander to active participant in the grim calculus of her profession. Her comment about the player having killed Father Gascoigne earlier demonstrates her awareness of events beyond her direct observation. This knowledge suggests an intelligence network or investigative capability that extends beyond simple hunting skills. As Hunter of Hunters, she must track not only corrupted hunters, but the patterns of corruption that create them. The weight of Henrik's death settles upon all participants in different ways. For Eileen, it represents another necessary execution in a long career of such acts. For the player, it marks their first experience with the moral complexity of hunting former allies. For the wider hunter community, it signals the loss of another veteran whose experience might have guided younger hunters. The tomb itself seems to absorb this latest tragedy, adding Henrik's blood to the stones that already hold the memory of Gascoigne's transformation. The space becomes layered with meaning, a repository of the hunt's failures, a monument to the corruption that claims even the most dedicated servants. Each death here adds to the location's dark significance. The aftermath of the battle reveals Eileen's professional efficiency in dealing with the emotional complexity of her work. She doesn't allow herself time for prolonged mourning or second guessing, instead focusing on the practical implications of what has transpired. This emotional discipline allows her to function despite the accumulated weight of similar encounters. Her warning about the differences between their respective duties reflects her understanding of the moral boundaries that separate legitimate hunters from those who hunt hunters. While the player may continue their work against beasts with clear conscience, her path requires different justifications and different costs. The distinction she draws protects both of them from confusion about their respective roles. The isolation that defines her profession becomes more apparent in the aftermath of Henrik's death. While the player may find camaraderie with other hunters or citizens of Yharnam, Eileen remains fundamentally alone in her duty. The very skills that make her effective as Hunter of Hunters also separate her from potential sources of comfort or understanding. Her recognition of the player's growing capabilities during this encounter plants seeds for future developments in their relationship. She begins to see potential in them that extends beyond simple combatability, qualities that might eventually prove relevant to larger concerns than individual corrupted hunters. This assessment will influence her later decisions about what information to share and what assistance to request. The success of their collaboration against Henrik establishes patterns of mutual support that will be tested in more challenging circumstances. They learn to coordinate their attacks, to watch each other's blind spots, to trust in each other's capabilities despite their different fighting styles and approaches. These lessons prove valuable preparation for greater challenges ahead. The professional satisfaction that Eileen derives from successfully completing this mission becomes tempered by awareness of its broader implications. Each corrupted hunter she eliminates represents both success and failure. Success in preventing the spread of corruption, but failure of the systems that should have protected that hunter from falling in the first place. Chapter 8. The Blood Moon Rises. The defeat of Rom, the vacuous spider, triggers a cosmic revelation that strips away the veils of illusion that have hidden Yharnam's true nature from mortal perception. As the blood moon rises to bathe the city in crimson light, reality reshapes itself to reveal horrors that were always present but mercifully concealed from human awareness. In this transformed landscape, Eileen the Crow faces her greatest challenge and approaches the end of her long service to the Hunter of Hunters Covenant. The timing of these events proves particularly cruel for Eileen, whose advanced age and declining physical capabilities leave her ill-equipped to handle the exponential increase in danger that the blood moon brings. Where younger hunters might adapt to the new reality through supernatural resilience or raw determination, she must rely on experience and cunning to navigate threats that would have challenged her even in her prime. The appearance of cosmic entities throughout Yharnam creates new categories of corruption that her traditional training never prepared her to address. Brain trusts and other eldritch horrors represent contamination that transcends simple blood drunkenness, offering insights into cosmic truths that human minds cannot safely process. The skills that made her effective against conventional corrupted hunters prove inadequate against foes whose madness stems from exposure to alien intelligence. Yet even as reality reshapes itself around her, Eileen maintains her focus on the specific threat that has brought her to the Cathedral Ward, the hunter known as the Bloody Crow of Cainhurst. This individual represents everything she is trained to oppose, a corrupted hunter whose bloodthirst has transformed him into something that perverts the very ideals the hunter community was meant to embody. The Bloody Crow's equipment tells a story of corruption that extends beyond simple blood drunkenness into realms of political intrigue and forbidden knowledge. His Cainhurst regalia marks him as associated with the vampire court that once challenged the Healing Church's authority, while his possession of the crow feather garb suggests a darker possibility, that he may have killed her predecessor or was once a hunter of hunters himself before abandoning his oath. This latter possibility adds personal dimension to Eileen's pursuit that transcends professional duty. If the Bloody Crow was indeed once a member of her covenant, then his corruption represents not just another target to be eliminated, but a fundamental betrayal of everything the Hunter of Hunters stands for. The sacred trust that binds those who bear the blade of mercy would have been shattered by such apostasy. The old hunter bone that the Bloody Crow employs in combat speaks to connections with the earliest generations of hunters, those who learned their techniques directly from Gehrman and his contemporaries. This relic allows him to employ quickening techniques that blur the line between human capability and supernatural intervention, making him a formidable opponent even for someone of Eileen's experience. His mastery of the Chiqage reflects immersion in Cainhurst's blood-based martial traditions, techniques that derive power from the wielder's own life force while simultaneously hastening their corruption. The weapon's transformed state channels blood into pure destructive energy, creating attacks that can overwhelm conventional defenses through sheer supernatural force. The repeating pistol he carries represents the pinnacle of Cainhurst's firearms technology, a weapon designed for those who value overwhelming firepower over subtlety or conservation of resources. In the hands of a skilled marksman, it becomes capable of delivering devastating attacks that can end fights before they truly begin. When Eileen finally confronts this formidable opponent, the battle that ensues pushes her capabilities beyond their breaking point. Despite all her experience and skill, despite the wisdom gained through decades of hunting corrupted hunters, she finds herself overmatched by an enemy who combines veteran expertise with supernatural enhancement and complete lack of moral restraint. The wounds she suffers in this encounter tell their own story about the nature of the combat that took place. The 3 claw-like gashes that mark her body suggest attacks that were meant not just to kill but to tear and savage, reflecting the bestial nature that underlies the Bloody Crow's human appearance. These are the wounds of someone who fought desperately against an opponent who showed no mercy or restraint. Her retreat to the steps of the Grand Cathedral represents both tactical withdrawal and symbolic positioning. She chooses to make her final stand at the entrance to Yharnam's most sacred space, drawing a line that her enemy will not be permitted to cross. Even in defeat, she maintains her role as guardian, placing herself between corruption and the innocent. The blood loss she suffers during this encounter brings her face to face with her own mortality in ways that previous battles may not have. The crimson stain that spreads around her position serves as visual reminder of the price that duty demands, the literal cost measured in blood and pain that comes with bearing the Hunter of Hunters covenant. Her consumption of blood vials in an attempt to stabilize her condition reflects the grim irony that defines much of Yharnam's medical practices. The very substance that creates the corruption she fights also provides the only means of healing available to hunters. Each drop of old blood that flows through her veins carries the potential for salvation and damnation in equal measure. The positioning of her final encounter, on the steps leading to the cathedral where she once watched over Henrik's corruption, creates thematic resonance that speaks to the cyclical nature of her duty. Just as she once stood vigil over one corrupted hunter, now she maintains watch over another, though this time as victim rather than predator. Her awareness that the Bloody Crow awaits within the cathedral demonstrates that even in her weakened state, she maintains the tactical intelligence that has kept her alive through decades of dangerous work. She knows her enemy's location, understands his capabilities, and recognizes the threat he poses to anyone who might encounter him unprepared. The lamp's deactivation, while she maintains her vigil on the cathedral steps, reflects the supernatural nature of the forces at work. Even the hunter's most basic tools become unreliable in the presence of such profound corruption, forcing reliance on purely human capabilities in situations that demand superhuman intervention. Her warnings to the player about avoiding the cathedral stem from genuine concern for their welfare combined with realistic assessment of the threat involved. She has faced the Bloody Crow and knows intimately the dangers he represents. Her advice comes from someone who has paid the price for underestimating such an opponent. the maternal quality of her concern for the player character becomes more pronounced in these final encounters. Having watched them grow from confused newcomer to capable hunter, she feels responsibility for their continued survival that transcends professional obligation. They represent perhaps her only meaningful connection to another person in years of enforced isolation. Her acknowledgement that the hunt has become too much for her represents more than simple physical exhaustion. She recognizes that the nature of the threats facing Yharnam has evolved beyond her ability to address effectively. The cosmic horrors revealed by the Blood Moon require different approaches and different capabilities than those she has spent her lifetime developing. The courage required to maintain her position, despite her injuries, speaks to the moral foundation that has sustained her through years of thankless service. Even facing certain death, she continues to fulfill her duty as protector and guardian. Her presence on those steps serves as both warning and inspiration to those who might follow in her footsteps. Chapter 9. The Final Hunt. When the player discovers Eileen wounded on the cathedral steps, they encounter her at perhaps the most vulnerable moment of her long career. The proud hunter who once offered guidance and protection now requires aid herself, reduced to a broken figure bleeding her life away on cold stone steps. Yet even in this extremity, her first instinct remains the protection of others, as she warns against entering the cathedral where her nemesis awaits. The visible extent of her injuries tells a story of desperate combat against an overwhelmingly superior opponent. The 3 parallel wounds that score her body suggest attacks delivered with bestial savagery, meant not merely to kill, but to tear and rend flesh. These are the marks of someone who fought not just a corrupted hunter, but something that had transcended human limitations entirely. Her labored breathing and weakened voice reflect blood loss that would have killed lesser individuals outright. Yet her eyes remain alert, tracking movement and assessing threats with the automatic vigilance of someone whose survival has depended on constant awareness. Even on the edge of death, she maintains the professional habits that have kept her alive through decades of dangerous work. The blood that pools around her position serves as stark reminder of the physical cost that duty has demanded. Each drop represents years of service, memories of fallen comrades, and the accumulated weight of choices made in service to an ideal that has required everything while offering little in return. Her life's work measured in crimson stains upon indifferent stone. Her consumption of blood vials, in a desperate attempt to stabilize her condition, reveals the grim irony that defines much of her existence. The very substance that creates the corruption she has spent her life fighting also provides her only hope of survival. Each drop of old blood that courses through her veins carries the potential for both healing and damnation. When she speaks of the enemy within the cathedral, her voice carries the weight of personal experience with forces that transcend ordinary corruption. The Bloody Crow of Cainhurst represents more than just another target for elimination. He embodies everything she has sworn to oppose, elevated to supernatural heights that make him nearly unstoppable by conventional means. Her warning about the dangers involved reflects both tactical assessment and genuine concern for the player's welfare. Having faced this opponent herself and paid the price for that encounter, she understands intimately the threats he poses to anyone unprepared for combat against such a formidable foe. Her advice comes from someone who has learned through painful experience exactly what such confrontations demand. The cathedral itself has been transformed by the Bloody Crow's presence into something approaching a shrine to corruption. The sacred space where pilgrims once sought healing and redemption now serves as lair for something that perverts every ideal the healing church claimed to represent. His occupation of this holy ground represents symbolic victory over the forces of order and decency. Yet Eileen's positioning on the cathedral steps establishes her as final guardian of this sacred threshold. Even in defeat, she maintains her role as protector, placing herself between corruption and the innocent. Her broken body serves as both warning and inspiration, demonstrating the price that duty demands while exemplifying the courage needed to pay it. The tactical challenge that awaits within the cathedral requires capabilities that transcend conventional hunter training. The Bloody Crow's combination of Cainhurst blood techniques, old hunter heritage, and complete moral abandonment creates an opponent who can only be defeated through perfect execution combined with favorable circumstances. Even then, victory remains far from certain. His mastery of the old hunter bone allows him to employ quickening techniques that blur the boundary between human capability and supernatural intervention. These abilities, derived from the remains of hunters who achieved transcendence through communion with cosmic forces, grant him speed and agility that make conventional combat tactics ineffective. The Chikage he wields represents the pinnacle of Cainhurst's blood-based martial traditions, a weapon that channels the wielder's life force into attacks of devastating power. In his hands, this blade becomes an extension of his corrupted will, capable of delivering strikes that can overwhelm even the most sophisticated defenses. His repeating pistol provides ranged capabilities that complement his melee prowess, allowing him to control engagement distances while delivering attacks powerful enough to end fights with single shots. The weapon's design reflects Cainhurst's emphasis on overwhelming firepower over subtlety or resource conservation. The healing capabilities he demonstrates during combat reveal access to blood techniques that exceed those available to ordinary hunters. His ability to recover from significant damage mid-fight transforms what might otherwise be wars of attrition into desperate struggles where every moment of advantage must be exploited immediately or lost forever. When the player finally confronts this ultimate expression of hunter corruption, they face an opponent who embodies every dark possibility that the hunt contains. He represents what hunters might become when stripped of moral constraint and elevated beyond human limitation. A cautionary tale made manifest in blood and shadow. The arena where this final confrontation takes place carries symbolic weight that extends beyond its tactical implications. This cathedral once served as focus for the Healing Church's spiritual authority, a place where believers sought connection with divine forces that might heal both body and soul. Now it serves as battleground between duty and corruption, honor and apostasy. The combat that ensues tests not just martial skill, but moral conviction. Victory requires more than superior technique or favorable positioning. It demands the kind of unwavering commitment to principle that has sustained Eileen through decades of thankless service. The player must prove themselves worthy of the legacy she represents. The Bloody Crow's eventual defeat, when it comes, represents more than simple triumph over a dangerous opponent. It validates the sacrifices that Eileen has made throughout her career, proves that her methods and principles retain relevance, even in the face of overwhelming corruption. His death serves as final punctuation mark on her long service to the Hunter of Hunter's Covenant. The Blood Rapture rune that he drops upon death carries significance that extends beyond its mechanical effects. This highest tier version of the rune represents mastery of techniques that drain life from victims to sustain the wielder. Abilities that epitomize everything Eileen has spent her career opposing. Its acquisition by the player symbolizes their assumption of responsibility for preventing such corruption. When the player returns to report their victory, they find Eileen exactly where they left her, still maintaining her vigil despite wounds that would have claimed lesser individuals. Her positioning unchanged suggests either supernatural determination or simple inability to move, though her alertness upon their approach indicates that consciousness has never fully left her. Her gratitude for their success carries undertones of relief that extend beyond personal survival. The elimination of the Bloody Crow removes a threat that she lacked the capability to address herself, validating her decision to trust in another's abilities despite her natural inclination towards self-reliance. Their victory becomes her victory in ways that transcend individual achievement. The Crow Hunter badge she bestows upon the player represents more than simple reward for services rendered. This ancient symbol carries with it the full authority and responsibility of the Hunter of Hunters covenant, transforming its recipient from ally into successor. The transfer marks the end of one era and the beginning of another. Her words about the work bearing no honor reflect hard-earned wisdom about the true nature of her profession. Unlike the hunters who gain recognition for their battles against obvious threats, the Hunter of Hunters operates in shadows, eliminating dangers that most never know existed. Their victories go unsung because the very knowledge of what they prevent would itself prove corrupting. The hunter rune she teaches carries spiritual significance that transcends its practical applications. This symbol represents not just membership in a covenant, but acceptance of a worldview that recognizes the fundamental corruption lurking within all who take up arms in Yharnam's endless hunt. To bear this rune is to acknowledge that one's peers may become enemies, that duty sometimes demands the killing of friends. Her acknowledgement that she may have become too old for this life represents more than simple physical decline. She recognizes that the nature of threats facing Yharnam has evolved beyond her ability to address effectively. The cosmic horrors revealed by the blood moon require different approaches and different capabilities than those she has spent her lifetime developing. Yet, her willingness to pass on her responsibilities suggests confidence in the player's ability to carry forward the Covenant's mission. She has observed their growth from confused newcomer to capable hunter, witnessed their moral development under extreme pressure, and judged them worthy of bearing burdens that have broken lesser individuals. The ambiguity surrounding her ultimate fate reflects the uncertain nature of endings in Bloodborne's world. When the player returns after receiving her final gifts, they find no trace of her presence, no body to confirm death, no trail to suggest departure. She simply vanishes, leaving behind only memories and the weight of inherited responsibility. This disappearance might represent peaceful death after a lifetime of service, her spirit finally released from duties that bound her to continue despite physical exhaustion. Alternatively, it might suggest recovery and departure, a wounded veteran choosing to spend her remaining time in pursuits less demanding than hunting corrupted hunters. The player is left to speculate about her ultimate fate, while grappling with the immediate reality of their new responsibilities. They inherit not just her position, but her isolation, her burden of knowledge, and her obligation to make decisions that others cannot understand or appreciate. The cycle continues with a new guardian, taking up the ancient watch. Chapter 10. The Crow's Shadow. The legacy that Eileen leaves behind extends far beyond the simple transfer of weapons and authority from one hunter to another. Her influence on the player character represents a form of spiritual inheritance that shapes their understanding of duty, sacrifice, and the moral complexities that define life in Yharnam's corrupted landscape. Through her example, she demonstrates that heroism sometimes requires actions that heroes themselves find abhorrent. The crow feather set that becomes available after her departure carries within its design the accumulated wisdom of generations of hunters. Each piece reflects practical considerations learned through bitter experience. The need for mobility over protection, stealth over intimidation, precision over overwhelming force. To don these garments is to accept not just their practical benefits, but their symbolic weight. The feathered mantle that gives the set its name serves purposes that extend beyond simple disguise or intimidation. In the cultural traditions that shaped the Hunter of Hunters covenant, feathers represent the soul's journey from earthly bondage to celestial freedom. By wearing such plumage, each successive covenant bearer embodies their role as psychopomp, the guide who shepherds corrupted souls from torment to peace. The beaked mask that conceals the wearer's features reflects both practical and spiritual considerations that have evolved over countless generations of service. Practically, it provides protection from bloodborne pathogens while concealing identity from potential targets. Spiritually, it represents the transformation from human to instrument of divine will, the surrender of personal identity in service to higher purpose. The high frenzy resistance built into the armor speaks to dangers that extend beyond physical combat into realms of psychological and spiritual corruption. The hunter of hunters must often witness scenes of depravity and madness that would break lesser minds, requiring protection not just from claws and fangs, but from the corrupting influence of cosmic horror itself. Yet the armor's relatively low physical protection values reflect the Covenant's emphasis on avoiding damage rather than absorbing it. The hunter of hunters cannot afford to engage in prolonged combat or rely on superior equipment to compensate for tactical mistakes. Their survival depends on speed, stealth, and the ability to end fights before they can develop into genuine contests of strength. The Blade of Mercy itself carries within its design centuries of refinement based on practical experience with the specific challenges facing those who hunt corrupted hunters. Its curved edges provide optimal cutting angles for attacks against human-sized opponents, while its splitting mechanism allows adaptation between close-quarters precision and mid-range flexibility. The weapon's scaling properties favor skill over strength, reflecting the Covenant's emphasis on technique over raw power. A hunter of hunters cannot rely on overwhelming force to defeat their targets. They must instead master the subtle arts of timing, positioning, and precise application of lethal force. The blade rewards this mastery with devastating effectiveness when properly employed. The special damage bonuses applied to attacks performed after quick-stepping reflect the weapon's integration with specific combat techniques developed over generations of use. These mechanics aren't simply game design choices, but represent the accumulated tactical wisdom of countless battles, encoded into the weapon's very structure through supernatural means. The lore implications of the weapon's meteoric origin connect it to cosmic forces that transcend earthly concerns. Like Gehrman's burial blade, it represents humanity's attempt to harness alien materials and energies in service of terrestrial goals. The success of this integration suggests either exceptional skill or divine favor in its creation. The complementary nature of its name, Blade of Mercy versus Burial Blade, reflects the different but related functions these weapons serve in Yharnam's supernatural ecosystem. Where Gehrman's blade grants final rest to beasts, Eileen's weapon grants final peace to hunters. Both serve as instruments of compassion, disguised as weapons of war. The Covenant's emphasis on quiet transfer from generation to generation reflects practical security concerns, as well as spiritual traditions. Those who hunt hunters must maintain operational secrecy to remain effective, but the knowledge they possess also makes them targets for various factions within Yharnam's complex political landscape. The requirement that successors be outsiders from the hinterlands serves multiple functions beyond simple emotional distance from local concerns. Such individuals bring fresh perspectives unclouded by prior allegiances, possess skills developed in environments where formal authority structures may not exist, and lack the social connections that might compromise their ability to act decisively when necessary. The Covenant's opposition to blasphemous Yharnam burial services reflects cultural traditions that predate the Healing Church's rise to prominence. These practices represent older ways of understanding death and its significance, wisdom that the Church's newer doctrines have either forgotten or deliberately suppressed in favor of teachings that serve institutional interests. The sky burial traditions that inform the Covenant's practices connect to real-world customs found in various mountainous regions where carrion birds serve as agents of spiritual transformation. These practices reflect beliefs about the soul's journey that emphasize liberation over preservation, transcendence over earthly attachment. The psychological profile required to serve effectively as hunter of hunters represents a rare combination of traits that few individuals possess. They must be compassionate enough to mourn the necessity of their actions, yet detached enough to perform those actions without hesitation. they must possess moral conviction, strong enough to resist corruption, yet flexible enough to adapt to changing circumstances. The isolation inherent in the role extends beyond simple operational security to encompass emotional and spiritual dimensions that can prove devastating to unprepared individuals. The Hunter of Hunters walks alone, not just tactically, but existentially, bearing knowledge and responsibilities that cannot be shared with those they serve. The player character's inheritance of this legacy represents more than simple succession to a position of authority. They become the latest link in a chain of service that stretches back to the earliest days of the hunt, inheriting not just power, but obligation, not just capability, but constraint. Chapter 11. Blood-drunk Hunters. To understand the full scope of Eileen's mission and the weight of the burden she passes on, we must examine the phenomenon of blood drunkenness that creates her targets. This corruption represents more than simple addiction or mental illness. It embodies the inevitable consequence of prolonged exposure to the forces that drive Yharnam's endless hunt. The old blood that flows through every hunter's veins carries within it the seeds of their eventual corruption. This substance, derived from great ones whose alien nature transcends human comprehension, grants enhanced physical capabilities at the cost of gradual psychological transformation. Each use brings hunters closer to the edge of madness, while making that edge increasingly difficult to perceive. The initial stages of blood drunkenness often appear as positive developments to those experiencing them. Enhanced strength, improved reflexes, and heightened aggression all serve hunters well in their battles against the beast scourge. The early symptoms masquerade as professional improvement, making detection and intervention extremely difficult. As the corruption progresses, hunters begin to lose the ability to distinguish between legitimate targets and innocent bystanders. The beast-like qualities they have spent their careers fighting begin to manifest in their own behavior, creating internal contradictions that their minds struggle to resolve. This cognitive dissonance often manifests as increasingly erratic decision-making and unpredictable behavior. The social structures that normally provide feedback and correction for aberrant behavior prove inadequate to address blood drunkenness because the corruption affects entire communities simultaneously. When everyone's judgment becomes compromised, there exists no external standard against which to measure individual decline. The Healing Church's own complicity in distributing the old blood ensures that institutional responses remain inadequate. Advanced blood drunkenness produces hunters who retain their skills and equipment while losing most of their moral constraints. These individuals become exponentially more dangerous than simple beasts because they combine human intelligence with bestial savagery. They understand tactics, know how to use weapons effectively, and can exploit the social bonds that connect them to potential victims. The tragedy of blood-drunk hunters lies in their retention of enough awareness to understand what they have become while lacking the willpower to change course. Many experience moments of clarity where they recognize their own corruption, but these insights prove insufficient to overcome the physiological changes that drive their behavior. Father Gascoigne serves as perhaps the most poignant example of this phenomenon. His transformation from devoted family man and skilled hunter into beast-like killer illustrates how blood drunkenness can claim even those with the strongest personal motivations to resist. His use of the music box as an anchor to his humanity demonstrates desperate attempts to maintain connection to his former self. The music box's temporary effectiveness against Gascoigne reveals important aspects of how blood drunkenness operates. The corruption doesn't simply erase personality or memory, but overlays them with bestial impulses that gradually become dominant. Familiar stimuli can temporarily restore access to suppressed human aspects, but such interventions become less effective over time. Henrik's case demonstrates how grief and loss can accelerate the corruption process. His partnership with Gascoigne created emotional bonds that intensified his exposure to the psychological trauma inherent in hunter work. When those bonds were severed by his partner's transformation and death, the resulting trauma created vulnerabilities that the old blood could exploit. The tragically long life, attributed to Henrik, reflects the cruel irony that survival itself becomes a risk factor for corruption. The longer hunters remain active, the greater their cumulative exposure to the forces that eventually claim them all. Experience and skill, rather than protecting against corruption, merely delay its inevitable arrival. The yellow garb that marks Henrik as corrupted carries symbolic weight that extends beyond simple color choice. Yellow has traditionally been associated with both madness and enlightenment, reflecting the dual nature of blood drunkenness as both degradation and terrible insight into Yharnam's true nature. Old hunters like Henrik possess skills and knowledge that make them particularly dangerous when corrupted. Their decades of experience provide them with intimate understanding of hunter tactics and psychology, knowledge they can exploit when they become threats rather than protectors. Their corruption represents the perversion of everything the hunter profession was meant to embody. The League's involvement with characters like Henrik suggests that blood drunkenness may be recognized as a systematic problem requiring institutional responses. However, the League's own methods and objectives remain sufficiently questionable that their solutions might prove as dangerous as the problems they claim to address. The executioners represent another potential response to blood-drunk hunters, though their approach emphasizes punishment over mercy. Their conflict with the Vile Bloods demonstrates that some factions prefer to address corruption through overwhelming force, rather than the surgical precision that defines the Hunter of Hunters covenant. The Vile Bloods themselves represent a different category of corruption, one that embraces rather than fights against the transformative power of blood. Their practices suggest that corruption can be channeled and controlled rather than simply resisted, though the long-term consequences of such approaches remain unclear. The player character's resistance to blood drunkenness may stem from their connection to the hunter's dream, which provides supernatural protection against certain forms of corruption. Alternatively, their outsider status might grant them perspective that natives lack, allowing them to recognize and resist influences that locals accept as normal. The various hunter NPCs encountered throughout the game demonstrate different stages and types of corruption, from the relatively functional like Jura to the completely transformed like the Bloody Crow of Cainhurst. This spectrum illustrates that blood drunkenness is not a binary condition, but a gradual process with many intermediate stages. The Church's role in perpetuating the corruption through distribution of the old blood creates a systemic problem that cannot be addressed through individual interventions alone. The Hunter of Hunters serves as damage control rather than cure, treating symptoms while the underlying cause continues to operate unchecked. The cosmic forces revealed after Rom's death suggest that blood drunkenness may be only one manifestation of a broader transformation affecting all life in Yharnam. The Beast Scourge, Hunter corruption, and Church madness may all represent different responses to the same underlying alien influence. The player's inheritance of Eileen's position places them in the paradoxical situation of using the very forces that create corruption to fight against that corruption's manifestations. The Hunter rune they receive marks them as both guardian against blood drunkenness and potential victim of the same phenomenon. Chapter 12. The Covenant's Origins. The Hunter of Hunters Covenant traces its origins to the earliest days of Yharnam's organized response to the Beast Scourge, emerging from recognition that the cure might prove as dangerous as the disease. When the first hunters took up arms against the transformed citizens plaguing the city's streets, wise individuals understood that these same hunters might eventually require oversight themselves. The founding of the Covenant reflects sophisticated understanding of institutional dynamics and human psychology that suggests guidance from sources with extensive experience in such matters. The specific requirements for succession, the emphasis on cultural outsiders, and the elaborate symbolic framework all point to deliberate design rather than organic evolution. Gehrman's workshop served as the technological foundation for the Covenant's establishment, providing the metallurgical expertise necessary to forge weapons from meteoric materials. The Blade of Mercy's creation, alongside the Burial Blade, suggests coordinated planning that encompassed multiple roles within the emerging hunter hierarchy. The choice of meteoric iron for these founding weapons carries implications that extend beyond simple material properties. Such substances represent contact between terrestrial and cosmic forces, embodying humanity's attempt to harness alien power for earthly purposes. The success of this integration suggests either exceptional skill or supernatural guidance in the forging process. The first hunter of hunters likely emerged from among Gehrman's earliest students, someone who demonstrated the rare combination of skill and moral stability necessary to police their peers. This individual would have required Gehrman's trust and support to establish the Covenant's authority within the broader hunter community. The emphasis on sky burial traditions suggests that the first hunter of hunters came from cultural backgrounds that emphasize spiritual transformation over physical preservation. These practices reflect beliefs about death and afterlife that differ significantly from Yharnam's conventional approaches, providing alternative frameworks for understanding the fate of corrupted hunters. The Covenant's adoption of crow symbolism serves multiple purposes beyond simple intimidation or disguise. Crows represent intelligence, adaptability, and the ability to thrive in hostile environments, qualities essential for those who must navigate Yharnam's complex political and supernatural landscape while maintaining operational effectiveness. The secretive nature of the Covenant's transfer procedures reflects both practical security concerns and spiritual traditions that emphasize personal worthiness over institutional authority. Each successive hunter of hunters must prove themselves through action rather than appointment, ensuring that the position remains held by those capable of bearing its responsibilities. The Covenant's persistence through multiple generations, despite the isolation and danger inherent in the role, speaks to the fundamental necessity of its mission. Without some mechanism for addressing hunter corruption, the Beast Scourge would have consumed Yharnam's defender from within as well as without. The limited number of individuals capable of serving effectively as hunter of hunters explains the rarity of transfers and the advanced age of many Covenant bearers. The specific psychological and moral qualities required exist in only a small percentage of the population, making recruitment a constant challenge. The Covenant's emphasis on mercy rather than punishment reflects sophisticated understanding of the nature of blood drunkenness and its effects on individual responsibility. Corrupted hunters are viewed as victims of forces beyond their control rather than villains deserving retribution, justifying the compassionate approach that gives the Blade of Mercy its name. The integration of foreign cultural practices into the Covenant structure demonstrates remarkable adaptability and inclusiveness that contrasts sharply with the Healing Church's later xenophobia. This openness to outside perspectives may have been crucial to the Covenant's survival during periods of institutional pressure. The Covenant's independence from direct church oversight reflects either exceptional political skill on the part of its founders, or recognition by church leadership that some functions must remain autonomous to remain effective. The Hunter of Hunters serves the broader hunter community rather than any specific faction, maintaining neutrality that allows intervention across organizational boundaries. The development of specialized techniques and equipment for dealing with corrupted hunters required extensive research and experimentation that would have been impossible without institutional support. The workshop's resources and expertise proved essential to creating tools adequate for such demanding work. The Covenant's emphasis on historical continuity through careful preservation of traditions and knowledge ensures that each successive hunter of hunters benefits from the accumulated wisdom of their predecessors. This institutional memory allows adaptation to new challenges while maintaining core principles and methods. The selection criteria for Covenant membership reflect understanding that effectiveness requires more than simple combatability. Candidates must demonstrate emotional stability, moral conviction, and psychological resilience that allow them to function despite the isolation and moral complexity inherent in their duties. The Covenant's survival through various political upheavals and institutional changes demonstrates remarkable adaptability and strategic thinking on the part of its leadership. Each hunter of hunters must navigate not only the immediate challenges of hunting corrupted peers, but also the broader political landscape that shapes their operating environment. The integration of spiritual and practical elements in the Covenant structure reflects holistic understanding of the challenges facing those who must repeatedly kill former allies. Without frameworks for understanding such actions as sacred duty rather than simple murder, few individuals could maintain psychological stability while performing such work. Chapter 13. The Price of Vigilance. The psychological toll exacted by service as Hunter of Hunters extends far beyond the immediate stress of combat against dangerous opponents. Each corrupted hunter eliminated represents not just a tactical victory, but a personal failure of the systems meant to protect and guide those who take up arms against the beast scourge. The accumulation of such failures weighs heavily on those responsible for addressing their consequences. Eileen's advanced age when we encounter her reflects not just the passage of years, but the accelerated aging that comes from bearing constant stress and responsibility. The hypervigilance required to detect corruption in its early stages demands mental resources that cannot be sustained indefinitely without significant cost to the individual's overall well-being. The isolation inherent in her role compounds these psychological pressures by denying her access to the social support systems that might otherwise help process the trauma associated with her work. She cannot share her experiences with other hunters without revealing information that might compromise their effectiveness or safety. She cannot seek comfort from civilians who lack the context necessary to understand the nature of her sacrifices. The moral ambiguity that defines many of her decisions creates additional sources of stress that ordinary hunters need not face. When she evaluates a potentially corrupted hunter, she must weigh the immediate threat they pose against the possibility that intervention might still save them from complete transformation. These life and death decisions must often be made with incomplete information under extreme time pressure. The knowledge that she herself remains vulnerable to the same corruption she fights in others adds existential dread to her daily existence. Each use of the old blood that sustains her enhanced capabilities brings her incrementally closer to the same fate that has claimed her targets. This awareness creates constant tension between the requirements of her duty and her own survival instincts. The physical demands of maintaining combat readiness, well beyond the age when most hunters retire, creates chronic pain and fatigue that she must endure without complaint. Her advanced years make recovery from injuries increasingly difficult, while the nature of her opponents makes those injuries increasingly likely and severe. The financial and logistical challenges of operating without institutional support add practical difficulties to her already overwhelming responsibilities. Unlike church hunters who benefit from organizational resources and supply chains, she must acquire equipment and supplies through personal effort while maintaining the secrecy essential to her effectiveness. The cognitive burden of tracking multiple potential targets simultaneously while maintaining awareness of broader patterns of corruption requires intellectual capabilities that few individuals possess. She must function as detective, analyst, and executioner while avoiding the mental fatigue that might compromise her judgment at critical moments. The emotional cost of repeatedly witnessing the transformation of noble individuals into corrupted shells of their former selves creates a form of anticipatory grief that pervades every interaction with fellow hunters. She cannot allow herself to form close bonds with peers when experience has taught her that such bonds will likely be severed by corruption or death. The spiritual weight of serving as judge, jury, and executioner for individuals who once shared her commitment to protecting the innocent challenges fundamental assumptions about justice and mercy that most people never need to examine. Her role requires her to make decisions that would be considered monstrous under normal circumstances, while maintaining the moral clarity necessary to distinguish between justified and unjustified violence. The sleep deprivation that accompanies constant vigilance for signs of corruption creates cumulative cognitive impairment that makes all other aspects of her job more difficult. The need to remain alert for threats that might emerge at any time prevents the restorative rest that would allow recovery from accumulated stress and fatigue. The nutritional challenges of maintaining physical condition while operating in environments where food security cannot be guaranteed add another layer of difficulty to her already complex situation. The old blood provides some sustenance, but cannot replace the balanced nutrition necessary for long-term health and functionality. The social stigma associated with her role, even among those who understand its necessity, creates barriers to forming relationships that might provide emotional support or practical assistance. Other hunters may respect her capabilities while remaining uncomfortable with the implications of her presence among them. The constant exposure to scenes of violence and corruption creates cumulative trauma that can manifest in various psychological symptoms, including hypervigilance, emotional numbing, and intrusive memories. These responses, while adaptive in the short term, can become maladaptive when sustained over extended periods. The knowledge that her work, while necessary, cannot address the root causes of the corruption she fights creates a sense of futility that undermines motivation and self-worth. She serves as a finger in the dike, holding back forces too vast for individual intervention to meaningfully affect. The pressure to find and train a suitable successor adds urgency to every decision and interaction as her physical capabilities decline. The knowledge that the Covenant's mission cannot be allowed to die with her creates additional stress during a period when she most needs to focus on immediate survival. The philosophical challenges of maintaining faith in human goodness while repeatedly witnessing its corruption by forces beyond individual control require constant effort to avoid descending into cynicism or despair. Her ability to continue caring about the people she serves, despite everything she has witnessed, speaks to remarkable strength of character. The physical effects of sustained stress on her aging body include compromised immune function, accelerated cellular damage, and increased vulnerability to injury and illness. These changes create cascading effects that make every aspect of her work more dangerous and difficult. The cognitive load of maintaining multiple identities and cover stories necessary for effective intelligence gathering adds mental complexity to situations that are already taxing her capabilities. She must remember not just what she knows, but what each of her various personas is supposed to know or not know. The temporal pressure created by awareness that her effectiveness has a limited lifespan forces difficult decisions about which battles to fight and which to avoid. Resource allocation becomes a constant challenge when every choice might represent a missed opportunity to prevent greater harm. Chapter 14. Henrik's Fall. The Tragedy of Old Hunter. Henrik represents one of the most poignant examples of how the hunt's corruption can claim even the most dedicated and skilled practitioners. His partnership with Father Gascoigne created bonds that transcended simple professional cooperation, forging emotional connections that would ultimately prove to be vulnerabilities when the inevitable corruption came for his closest ally. Henrik's tragically long life reflects the cruel irony that survival itself becomes a liability in Yharnam's hostile environment. Where shorter careers might spare hunters from witnessing the full scope of the corruption that claims their peers, his extended service exposed him to repeated cycles of loss that accumulated over decades of faithful service. The partnership between Henrik and Gascoigne represented an ideal of hunter cooperation that the beast scourge systematically destroys. Their complementary skills and mutual trust allowed them to tackle threats that neither could have faced alone, creating a synergy that made both more effective and temporarily more resistant to the corruption that surrounded them. Henrik's role as the more experienced partner placed him in a mentoring position that would have deepened his emotional investment in Gascoigne's welfare and development. This relationship dynamic created additional guilt when his protégé's corruption became apparent, as he would have felt personal responsibility for failing to prevent or address the warning signs. The yellow garb that distinguishes Henrik from other hunters carries symbolic weight that reflects his psychological state following Gascoigne's transformation. Yellow traditionally represents both madness and enlightenment, suggesting that his corruption involves terrible insights into the true nature of the hunt and its ultimate futility. His choice of weapons, the saw cleaver and hunter pistol, represents a return to the basic tools that he and Gascoigne would have used during their early partnership. This regression suggests either practical necessity due to declining capabilities or psychological retreat to a time when their purpose seemed clear and their bond remained intact. The throwing knives that supplement his armament reflect skills developed through decades of experience with precise, efficient killing. His mastery of these secondary weapons demonstrates the kind of professional excellence that made his partnership with Gascoigne so effective, while highlighting how such skills can become dangerous when employed without moral restraint. His positioning at the tomb of Udorn represents more than simple coincidence or convenience. The symbolic weight of choosing his partner's death site as a base of operations suggests either deliberate ritual significance or unconscious attraction to the location of his greatest personal trauma. The raw gesture that punctuates his combat encounters serves multiple functions beyond simple intimidation. These vocalizations provide emotional release for grief and rage that cannot be expressed through normal channels, while also demonstrating the bestial qualities that have begun to manifest in his behavior. His resistance to conventional social norms and authority structures reflects the breakdown of psychological frameworks that previously governed his behavior. The corruption that claims hunters often manifests first as rejection of external constraints, creating individuals who retain their skills while losing their moral compass. The Confederate status that marks his connection to the League suggests that his corruption may have been recognized and addressed by that organization's methods rather than being allowed to progress naturally. However, the League's own questionable practices make their intervention potentially problematic rather than clearly beneficial. His summon sign appearances in areas connected to Byrgenwerth and other scholarly pursuits hint at interests and connections that extend beyond simple beast hunting. These associations suggest exposure to knowledge or influences that may have contributed to his eventual corruption through intellectual rather than purely physical means. The notes that may have been left by Henrik reference Rom as the Byrgenwerth spider in locations where local knowledge would typically use her name, suggesting either deliberate obfuscation or psychological distance from established social frameworks. His perspective as an outsider allows him to see patterns that natives might miss or ignore. His potential family connections to Father Gascoigne through marriage create additional layers of personal tragedy that compound the professional loss. If speculation about his relationship to Viola proves accurate, then Gascoigne's corruption cost him both partner and daughter, leaving him isolated from all meaningful human connections. The timing of his appearance at the tomb following the unlocking of Cathedral Ward gates suggests either careful monitoring of the player's progress or supernatural knowledge of events beyond his direct observation. This awareness implies capabilities that extend beyond those typically associated with corrupted hunters. His hostile reaction to the player character may stem from recognition of their role in Gascoigne's death, even if that death was necessary to prevent further corruption. The bonds between hunting partners often transcend rational analysis, creating emotional responses that survive even when logical justification no longer exists. The tactical challenge he presents combines veteran hunter skills with the unpredictability that comes from psychological instability. His experience provides him with intimate knowledge of hunter tactics and psychology, while his corruption removes the self-restraint that would normally limit his willingness to exploit such knowledge. His appearance during Eileen's confrontation with him reveals the physical toll that grief and corruption have taken on his aging body. While still formidable in combat, he shows signs of decline that suggest his time as an active threat may be naturally limited even without intervention. The location of their final battle adds symbolic weight to the encounter that transcends simple tactical considerations. Fighting in the space where Gascoigne fell creates thematic resonance between past and present tragedies, while providing physical reminders of the corruption's inevitable progression. The assistance that the player can provide to Eileen during this encounter represents their transition from observer to participant in the grim calculus of hunter politics. Their willingness to intervene against a corrupted former ally demonstrates acceptance of the moral compromises that define life in Yharnam's hostile environment. Chapter 15. The Bloody Crow's Shadow. The hunter known as the Bloody Crow of Cainhurst represents the ultimate expression of everything the Hunter of Hunter's Covenant was created to oppose. His combination of exceptional skill, supernatural enhancement, and complete moral abandonment creates a threat that transcends individual danger to become an existential challenge to the entire concept of honorable hunting. His equipment tells a story of corruption that extends across multiple factions and institutions, suggesting connections and influences that reach into the highest levels of Yharnam's power structures. The Cainhurst regalia marks him as associated with the vampire court that once challenged the Healing Church's authority, while his possession of church workshop weapons indicates access to resources that should have been beyond his reach. The crowfeather garb that forms part of his ensemble carries implications that add personal dimension to Eileen's pursuit. If this armor was taken from her predecessor through violence, then his elimination becomes not just professional duty, but personal vengeance for crimes against the Covenant itself. The possibility that he was once a hunter of hunters who abandoned his oath makes his corruption even more reprehensible. His mastery of the old hunter bone demonstrates connections to the earliest generations of hunters, those who learned their techniques directly from Gehrman and his contemporaries. This relic grants him access to quickening abilities that blur the boundary between human capability and supernatural intervention, making him exponentially more dangerous than conventional opponents. The Chikaji he wields represents the pinnacle of Cainhurst's blood-based martial traditions, techniques that derive power from the wielder's life force, while simultaneously hastening their corruption. His willingness to employ such methods demonstrates either desperation or complete abandonment of concern for his own welfare in pursuit of power. The weapon's transformed state channels blood into attacks of devastating power that can overwhelm conventional defenses through sheer supernatural force. His mastery of these techniques suggests extensive training under Cainhurst tutelage, possibly including direct instruction from Queen Annalise or her closest retainers. The repeating pistol he employs as a secondary weapon demonstrates Cainhurst's emphasis on overwhelming firepower over subtlety or resource conservation. In skilled hands, this weapon becomes capable of delivering attacks powerful enough to end fights with single shots, particularly when enhanced through blood-based techniques. His tactical approach combines the precision of an experienced hunter with the unpredictability of someone who has transcended normal moral constraints. He retains enough intelligence to exploit conventional weaknesses, while possessing enough power to create new tactical realities that inexperienced opponents cannot adapt to quickly enough. The healing capabilities he demonstrates during combat reveal access to blood techniques that exceed those available to ordinary hunters. His ability to recover from significant damage mid-fight transforms what might otherwise be wars of attrition into desperate struggles where every moment of advantage must be exploited immediately or lost forever. His positioning within the Grand Cathedral for their final confrontation adds symbolic weight that extends beyond tactical considerations. This sacred space once served as the focus for the Healing Church's spiritual authority, a place where believers sought connection with divine forces that might heal both body and soul. The corruption of this holy ground by his presence represents symbolic victory over the forces of order and decency that the cathedral was meant to embody. His occupation of this space perverts its sacred function while providing him with psychological advantages over opponents who retain respect for religious significance. The arena's layout favors his particular combination of ranged and melee capabilities, while providing limited options for opponents who prefer stealth or hit-and-run tactics. The open floor plan eliminates most cover, while the elevated altar position allows him to control engagement distances and timing. His behavioral patterns during combat suggest systematic training in anti-hunter techniques that goes beyond simple experience with conventional opponents. His ability to counter standard hunter tactics implies specific preparation for fighting others of his kind, knowledge that could only come from extensive study or direct instruction. The Blood Rapture rune he carries represents mastery of techniques that drain life from victims to sustain the wielder, abilities that epitomize everything the Hunter of Hunters Covenant opposes. This highest tier version of the rune suggests extensive practice with such methods, possibly including multiple murders performed specifically to develop these capabilities. His apparent immunity to conventional moral appeals or psychological pressure demonstrates complete disconnection from the human concerns that might otherwise create vulnerabilities. He has transcended normal human limitations while abandoning normal human constraints, creating an opponent who cannot be reasoned with or deterred through anything less than overwhelming force. The challenge he represents to Eileen exceeds her capabilities, not because of any deficiency in her skills or experience, but because the nature of corruption has evolved beyond the parameters that define the Covenant's original mission. He embodies threats that the first Hunter of Hunters never envisioned when establishing the traditions she follows. His eventual defeat, when it comes, requires capabilities that exceed those available to any individual hunter operating alone. The supernatural resilience and resource availability that the hunter's dream provides to the player character prove essential to overcoming an opponent who has transcended normal human limitations through different but equally effective means. The significance of his elimination extends beyond simple removal of a dangerous threat to encompass validation of the principles that have guided the Hunter of Hunters Covenant throughout its long history. His death proves that corruption, no matter how powerful or sophisticated, cannot ultimately triumph over dedication and moral purpose when those qualities are properly supported. The Blood Rapture rune he drops upon death serves as final testament to the methods that sustained his power while demonstrating their ultimate insufficiency. The player's acquisition of this item represents their assumption of responsibility for ensuring that such techniques are not employed for destructive purposes by future wielders. Chapter 16: The Dreaming and the Waking. Eileen's relationship with the Hunter's dream represents one of the most poignant aspects of her character, highlighting the sacrifices that come with extended service and the complex relationship between hunters and the supernatural forces that sustain their work. Her statement that she no longer dreams carries implications that extend far beyond simple sleep patterns into fundamental questions about identity, purpose, and the price of wisdom. The hunter's dream serves multiple functions for those connected to it, providing not just sanctuary and resource access, but psychological support that helps maintain sanity in the face of overwhelming horror. The dream's influence shapes perception and memory in ways that allow hunters to continue functioning despite experiences that would break ordinary minds. Eileen's disconnection from this system represents both liberation and abandonment, freeing her from influences that might cloud her judgment while denying her access to protections that make dangerous work survivable. This trade-off reflects the complex relationship between independence and support that defines much of her character. The practical implications of losing dream access manifest in various ways throughout her encounters with the player. Her limited healing capabilities, finite resources, and vulnerability to permanent death all reflect the absence of supernatural support that younger hunters take for granted. Yet this same disconnection grants her perspectives unavailable to those still under the dream's influence. She can see patterns and motivations that dream-connected hunters might miss or rationalize away, providing warnings and guidance that prove invaluable despite their sometimes unwelcome nature. Her advanced age suggests that she has been disconnected from the dream for an extended period, indicating either voluntary withdrawal or forced separation due to factors beyond her control. The reasons for this disconnection remain unclear, but the timing suggests correlation with her assumption of Hunter's responsibilities. The possibility that dream disconnection represents a natural consequence of Covenant service raises disturbing questions about the true nature of both institutions. If the Hunter of Hunters necessarily operates outside dream protection, then each Covenant bearer accepts vulnerability as an inherent aspect of their duty. Alternatively, her disconnection might represent Gehrman's attempt to grant mercy to someone who has served long enough to deserve rest from the endless cycle of hunting and death. This interpretation suggests recognition of her sacrifices, combined with acknowledgement that some burdens cannot be borne indefinitely. The wisdom she demonstrates about the hunt's true nature may stem partially from her freedom from dream influences that encourage hunters to continue despite mounting evidence of their mission's futility. Her warnings about inevitable corruption carry additional weight because they come from someone no longer subject to supernatural compulsion to hunt. Her ability to function effectively despite dream disconnection speaks to exceptional personal strength and professional competence that allowed her to adapt to circumstances that would defeat less capable individuals. The skills and knowledge she accumulated during her dream-connected years provide foundation for continued effectiveness in her altered state. The loneliness that accompanies dream disconnection extends beyond simple isolation from other hunters to encompass separation from the only community that might understand her experiences. The shared connection to the dream creates bonds among hunters that she can no longer fully participate in. Her recognition of the player character as another outsider suggests ability to identify others who share her fundamental displacement from normal social structures. This recognition allows her to offer guidance based on personal experience with the challenges of operating without conventional support systems. The maternal concern she shows toward the player reflects emotional needs that can no longer be met through normal channels. Her isolation has created hunger for meaningful connection that expresses itself through protective instincts towards someone she recognizes as vulnerable to forces she understands intimately. Her knowledge of dream mechanics and their effects on connected hunters provides valuable intelligence about the supernatural systems that shape hunter society. This understanding allows her to predict behavior patterns and emotional responses that might otherwise seem inexplicable. The contrast between her perspective and that of dream-connected hunters creates tension in their interactions that reflects broader themes about the relationship between wisdom and innocence. Her insights, while valuable, often prove unwelcome because they challenge comfortable assumptions about the nature of their work. Her eventual passing of the Covenant to the player represents an attempt to bridge the gap between dream-connected and disconnected perspectives. The player's unique position as someone still connected to the dream, but educated about its limitations, might allow them to serve more effectively than purely traditional approaches would permit. The ambiguity surrounding her ultimate fate reflects uncertainty about whether dream disconnection represents temporary separation or permanent severance. The possibility of restoration creates hope, while the risk of permanent loss adds urgency to her remaining work. Chapter 17: Sky Burial and Sacred Duty. The cultural traditions that inform Eileen's approach to her duties as Hunter of Hunters reflect worldviews that differ fundamentally from those that dominate Yharnam's religious and social institutions. Her people's practice of sky burial embodies beliefs about death and spiritual transition that shape everything from her choice of weapons to her understanding of her mission's ultimate purpose. Sky burial, as practiced in various real-world cultures, represents the idea that death should facilitate the soul's journey to whatever realm awaits beyond earthly existence. Rather than preserving the physical form through elaborate burial or cremation rituals, this practice exposes the deceased to natural forces that reduce the body to its essential elements while allowing the spirit to depart unencumbered. The practical aspects of sky burial require careful attention to location, timing, and procedure to ensure that the process unfolds with proper dignity and spiritual significance. Bodies must be positioned in elevated locations, accessible to carrion birds, with specific arrangements made to facilitate the natural decomposition that represents spiritual liberation. For Eileen's people, the carrion birds that consume exposed remains serve as sacred agents of transformation rather than mere scavengers. These creatures become psychopomps, guides who shepherd souls from the earthly realm to whatever lies beyond. Their role transcends simple biological function to encompass spiritual responsibility of profound significance. The contrast between sky burial and Yharnam's conventional interment practices reflects deeper philosophical differences about the nature of death and its meaning. Where Yharnam's traditions emphasize preservation and remembrance, Eileen's heritage focuses on liberation and transcendence. These competing worldviews create tension that influences her relationship with local customs and institutions. Her adoption of crow symbolism represents more than simple cultural nostalgia or practical disguise. By taking on the appearance and attributes of carrion birds, she embodies her spiritual function as guide for souls trapped in corrupted flesh. Her blade becomes an instrument of liberation rather than simple execution. The feathered mantle that gives her armor its distinctive appearance serves both practical and symbolic functions that reflect integration of cultural traditions with tactical requirements. The feathers provide visual identification while invoking the spiritual significance of the creatures they represent. The beaked mask that conceals her features transforms her appearance in ways that transcend simple disguise or intimidation. Like the plague doctors who inspired its design, she becomes an avatar of healing through separation, the removal of corruption from the broader community through precise surgical intervention. Her understanding of death as transition rather than termination allows her to perform her grim duties without descending into despair or self-loathing. Each corrupted hunter she eliminates represents not a failure of mercy, but a success of compassion, the freeing of a trapped soul from circumstances that offered no other form of relief. The precision required for proper sky burial procedures translates into tactical advantages when applied to combat situations. Her knowledge of anatomy and decomposition processes informs her targeting decisions, allowing her to deliver strikes that minimize suffering while maximizing effectiveness. The spiritual discipline required to perform sky burial rituals with proper reverence and attention to detail develops psychological resilience that proves invaluable when facing the moral complexity of hunting former allies. Her cultural training provides frameworks for understanding difficult actions as sacred duties rather than simple violence. The seasonal and environmental factors that influence sky burial procedures require deep understanding of natural cycles and their spiritual significance. This knowledge translates into tactical awareness of how environmental conditions affect combat effectiveness and strategic planning. The community responsibilities associated with sky burial practices develop social skills and emotional intelligence that serve her well when navigating Yharnam's complex political landscape. Her ability to read human motivations and predict behavioral patterns stems partially from cultural training in managing sensitive group dynamics. The reverence for natural processes that underlies sky burial philosophy influences her approach to corruption and its treatment. Rather than viewing blood drunkenness as purely negative phenomenon, she understands it as natural consequence of exposure to forces beyond human comprehension, something to be managed rather than condemned. Her recognition that Yharnam's burial practices represent blasphemy reflects not mere cultural chauvinism, but genuine understanding of spiritual principles that local customs violate. The preservation techniques employed by Yharnam's undertakers may actually trap souls in ways that prevent proper transition to whatever realm awaits beyond. The patience required for sky burial procedures to unfold naturally develops temporal perspectives that prove valuable when tracking corrupted hunters over extended periods. Her ability to wait for optimal moments to strike reflects cultural training in allowing natural processes to proceed at their own pace. The acceptance of mortality that sky burial practices cultivate provides psychological protection against the existential dread that claims many hunters who struggle to accept their own eventual fate. Her comfort with death as natural transition allows her to face dangerous situations without paralyzing fear. Chapter 18: The Weight of Wisdom. The knowledge that Eileen has accumulated through decades of service as Hunter of Hunters carries with it burdens that extend far beyond simple professional expertise. Her understanding of Yharnam's true nature, the forces that drive its corruption, and the ultimate futility of most attempts at meaningful reform creates psychological pressures that few individuals could withstand without significant cost to their mental and emotional well-being. Her warnings about the inevitable corruption that claims all hunters stem from pattern recognition, developed through years of witnessing the same tragic cycle repeat itself with minor variations. Each new generation of hunters arrives with confidence and noble intentions, only to succumb eventually to the same forces that claimed their predecessors. This knowledge makes every interaction with younger hunters bittersweet. The cosmic horror that underlies Yharnam's problems transcends human scale and comprehension in ways that make conventional solutions inadequate or counterproductive. Her awareness of Great Ones and their influence on mortal affairs provides context for events that might otherwise seem random or inexplicable. But this understanding also reveals the ultimate insignificance of individual human efforts. Her recognition that the Healing Church's own leadership has been compromised by the forces they claim to oppose creates additional layers of cynicism about institutional responses to systemic problems. The very organizations that should provide guidance and support have become part of the corruption they were meant to address. The blood ministration that sustains hunter capabilities while gradually destroying their humanity represents a Faustian bargain that she has witnessed play out countless times. Her own continued use of such enhancement methods places her in the paradoxical position of employing corrupting forces to fight corruption, creating internal contradictions that demand constant moral vigilance. Her understanding of the beast scourge's true origins and its relationship to the old blood reveals the hunt itself as part of the problem rather than its solution. Each hunter who takes up arms against the beasts unknowingly contributes to the very forces that create more beasts, perpetuating cycles of violence that serve alien purposes rather than human welfare. The political complexities that surround hunter activities in Yharnam require navigation of competing factions whose public goals often mask private agendas that serve interests antithetical to public welfare. Her position as outsider grants her perspective on these dynamics while denying her the influence necessary to address them effectively. The temporal scope of the corruption she fights extends far beyond individual lifespans or even generational cycles, encompassing patterns that unfold over centuries or millennia. This long-term perspective makes short-term victories seem insignificant, while highlighting the magnitude of forces arrayed against any meaningful reform efforts. Her awareness of the player character's unique position as dream-connected outsider creates hope tempered by realistic assessment of the challenges they face. She recognizes potential in them that previous hunters lacked, while understanding the obstacles that will likely prevent them from achieving lasting change. The philosophical implications of her work force her to grapple with fundamental questions about free will, moral responsibility, and the nature of good and evil in a universe where cosmic forces routinely override human agency. These considerations would challenge the most sophisticated philosophers under ideal circumstances. The emotional toll of repeatedly witnessing noble individuals transform into monsters creates a form of anticipatory grief that affects every relationship she forms with fellow hunters. Her protective detachment serves as psychological defense mechanism, while limiting her access to social support that might help process traumatic experiences. The practical limitations that constrain her effectiveness, despite her knowledge and experience, create frustration that she must carefully manage to avoid compromising her judgment during critical moments. The gap between understanding problems and possessing means to address them effectively grows wider with each passing year. Her recognition that training a successor requires sharing knowledge that may prove as burdensome as helpful creates ethical dilemmas about how much truth to reveal and when. The wisdom necessary for effective service as Hunter of Hunters may also be sufficient to drive unprepared individuals to despair or madness. The isolation that protects her operational security also denies her opportunities to validate her perceptions through discussion with others who might share relevant experiences. This intellectual isolation increases risk of developing cognitive biases or blind spots that could prove dangerous in tactical situations. Her awareness of her own advancing age and declining capabilities creates urgency about accomplishing remaining goals while time permits. The knowledge that her effectiveness has natural limits adds pressure to decisions about resource allocation and priority setting that would be complex under any circumstances. The spiritual dimensions of her duty require reconciling cultural traditions about death and transcendence, with practical realities of violence and suffering that often seem to contradict idealistic beliefs. Maintaining faith in meaningful purpose while confronting evidence of cosmic indifference demands extraordinary psychological resilience. Chapter 19. Legacy of the Hunt. As Eileen's story draws toward its conclusion, the question of legacy becomes paramount, not just for her personally, but for the broader traditions she represents. The Hunter of Hunters Covenant faces an uncertain future in a world where the very concepts of duty and honor seem increasingly irrelevant in the face of cosmic horror and systemic corruption. The player character's inheritance of her position represents both continuity and potential transformation of the Covenant's mission and methods. Their unique status as dream-connected outsider grants them capabilities and perspectives that might allow adaptation to challenges that proved beyond Eileen's ability to address effectively. The changed nature of threats facing Yharnam following the Blood Moon's revelation of cosmic horrors requires evolution of traditional approaches that may not prove adequate against alien influences. The Hunter of Hunters Covenant was designed to address human corruption, not the fundamental alteration of reality itself. The weapons and armor that pass from Eileen to her successor carry within their design centuries of accumulated wisdom about the specific challenges facing those who hunt corrupted hunters. Yet these tools may prove insufficient against opponents who have transcended normal human limitations through supernatural enhancement. The institutional knowledge that each Hunter of Hunters accumulates through service represents irreplaceable resource that dies with them unless successfully transmitted to successors. Eileen's attempt to guide the player character reflects recognition that experiential wisdom cannot be simply inherited, but must be earned through shared struggle. The philosophical frameworks that sustain the Covenant's mission through generations of thankless service require constant reinforcement and reinterpretation to remain relevant in changing circumstances. The moral certainties that guided earlier generations may prove inadequate for addressing the ambiguous situations that define modern Yharnam. The selection criteria that determine succession within the Covenant reflect understanding of personal qualities necessary for bearing such burdens effectively. Yet these same criteria may prove too restrictive if the pool of suitable candidates continues to shrink as corruption spreads throughout the hunter community. The secretive nature of the Covenant's operations has protected its effectiveness while limiting its influence on broader institutional reforms that might address root causes of the problems it treats. This operational security creates a tension between immediate effectiveness and long-term strategic impact. The relationship between the Hunter of Hunters Covenant and other factions within Yharnam's complex political landscape remains largely undefined, creating opportunities for cooperation, but also risks of exploitation or manipulation by groups with competing agendas. The Covenant's emphasis on individual action, rather than systematic reform, reflects both practical limitations and philosophical commitments that may need reassessment in light of the scope of corruption revealed by recent events. Personal virtue alone may prove insufficient to address problems of cosmic scale. The training methods that prepare new Hunter of Hunters for their responsibilities must balance the need for practical skills with preservation of moral clarity that prevents them from becoming what they fight against. This balance becomes increasingly difficult to maintain as threats evolve beyond traditional parameters. The spiritual traditions that inform the Covenant's understanding of its mission provide meaning and purpose that sustain its members through difficult periods, while potentially limiting adaptation to circumstances that fall outside traditional frameworks for understanding duty and sacrifice. The Covenant's survival through multiple generations demonstrates remarkable resilience and adaptability, while raising questions about what essential characteristics must be preserved and what aspects might be modified without compromising core mission effectiveness. The documentation and preservation of Covenant traditions faces inherent challenges from the secretive nature of its operations and the tendency for knowledge to die with its bearers. Eileen's interaction with the player character represents rare opportunity for deliberate knowledge transfer under controlled circumstances. The evaluation of the Covenant's overall effectiveness requires assessment of not just immediate tactical successes, but broader strategic impact on the problems it was created to address. This evaluation becomes complicated by the difficulty of measuring prevented corruption or deterrent effects. The future viability of the Hunter of Hunters concept depends on continued availability of individuals with the rare combination of skills, moral fortitude, and psychological resilience necessary for effective service. Changes in hunter recruitment and training may affect the supply of suitable candidates. The integration of new technologies and supernatural capabilities into the Covenant's traditional methods requires careful consideration of how such innovations might enhance effectiveness while preserving essential characteristics that define its identity and mission. The relationship between the Covenant and the broader hunter community evolves continuously as circumstances change and new challenges emerge. Maintaining necessary independence while avoiding complete isolation requires delicate balance that each generation must navigate according to their own circumstances. Chapter 20. The Endless Vigil. In the shadow of the Grand Cathedral, where ancient stones have witnessed countless prayers and desperate pleas for salvation, Eileen the Crow completes her final duty as Hunter of Hunters. Her broken body serves as testament to the price that honor demands in a world where cosmic horror masquerades as divine providence. Yet even in defeat, she maintains her vigil, standing guard between corruption and innocence until another can take up the burden she has carried for so long. The player character's assumption of her role represents not an ending, but a transformation. The eternal cycle of service that defines the Hunter of Hunters Covenant continues with new hands, wielding ancient weapons in service to timeless ideals. The Blade of Mercy passes to another generation, carrying within its metal the accumulated wisdom and sorrow of all who came before. Eileen's disappearance from the cathedral steps, whether through death or departure, marks the end of an era while beginning another. Her legacy lives on not in monuments or ceremonies, but in the continued protection of those who take up arms against the beast scourge. The covenant she served persists because its mission remains necessary, even as the nature of that mission evolves to meet new challenges. The blood that stained those ancient stones speaks to sacrifices both made and yet to come. Each drop represents dedication to principles that transcend personal survival, commitment to duties that offer no reward beyond the satisfaction of service rendered faithfully. In Yharnam's fallen world, such dedication represents humanity's highest achievement. The crow's shadow that gave her name continues to fall across Yharnam's streets, now cast by another who has accepted the weight of watching over watchers. The ancient compact between the living and the dead, the corrupted and the pure, the necessary and the noble, continues under new stewardship while honoring old traditions. The whispered stories that hunters tell in quiet moments will preserve her memory long after her physical presence has faded from the world. Tales of the mysterious figure who appeared when corruption threatened to overwhelm their ranks, who struck with surgical precision to remove threats they never knew existed, who disappeared back into shadow without seeking recognition or reward. The lessons she taught through word and example remain available to those wise enough to seek them out. Her warnings about the hunt's inevitable toll, her demonstration of duty's demands, her embodiment of mercy disguised as judgment, all continue to influence those who follow in her footsteps. The hunter's dream itself bears traces of her passage, though she walked its paths no longer in her final years. The weapons rack that once held her blade, the workbench where she maintained her tools, the quiet corners where she might have rested between hunts, all retain echoes of her presence for those sensitive enough to perceive them. The covenant she served survives because it serves needs that transcend individual personalities or particular historical moments. As long as hunters take up arms against the beast scourge, some will inevitably succumb to the very corruption they fight. As long as that corruption spreads, someone must stand ready to make the hard choices that preserve the integrity of those who remain unclaimed. The player character, who inherits her position, carries forward not just responsibility, but possibility. The chance to adapt ancient wisdom to new circumstances, to honor traditional methods while developing innovative approaches, to serve the Covenant's mission while perhaps expanding its scope and effectiveness. The city of Yharnam continues its descent into madness and corruption, but within that darkness, points of light persist. The Hunter of Hunters represents one such light, not bright enough to illuminate everything, but steady enough to provide guidance for those lost in shadow. This illumination continues under new leadership while drawing power from ancient sources. The Great Ones whose influence shapes Yharnam's fate remain largely indifferent to human concerns, but the human response to their presence continues to matter. Each act of courage, each sacrifice made in service to others, each moment of mercy granted to the fallen, all contribute to something greater than the sum of individual actions. The beast scourge that transforms Yharnam's citizens into monsters operates according to laws that humans can observe but not fully comprehend. Yet within those parameters, choices still matter. The decision to hunt beasts rather than become them, to protect others rather than exploit them, to serve honor rather than convenience. These choices define what remains human in an increasingly inhuman world. The old blood that grants power while demanding corruption creates the fundamental paradox that defines every hunter's existence. They must use the enemy's tools to fight the enemy, accept contamination to prevent contamination, embrace violence to preserve peace. The Hunter of Hunters embodies this paradox while seeking to minimize its costs. The dreams that connect hunters to supernatural guidance provide comfort and purpose, while potentially obscuring truths that might prove inconvenient to their cosmic sponsors. The Hunter of Hunters operates partly outside this influence, seeing clearly while lacking protection that clarity might otherwise provide. The endless night that has fallen over Yharnam reflects more than simple absence of daylight. It represents the triumph of forces that thrive in darkness over those that require illumination to function effectively. Yet even in permanent twilight, stars continue to shine for those who remember to look upward. The hunt continues because it must continue, driven by necessity rather than hope, sustained by duty rather than enthusiasm. Each new hunter who takes up arms against the beast scourge becomes part of an ancient tradition that predates their understanding, while depending on their participation for its survival. The story of Eileen the Crow ends not with final victory or ultimate defeat, but with transition, the passing of responsibility from hands grown weary to others still capable of bearing weight that never diminishes. Her tale becomes part of the larger narrative that encompasses all who serve, all who sacrifice, all who choose duty over safety in service to ideals larger than themselves. In the Gothic spires of Yharnam, where shadows dance with firelight and ancient stones echo with memories of countless tragedies, the Hunter of Hunters maintains eternal vigil. The individual who bears this responsibility may change, but the responsibility itself remains constant, a necessary burden in a world where the alternative to vigilance is surrender to forces that recognize no limit to their appetite for corruption. The blood-soaked streets bear witness to this endless struggle, each cobblestone marked by sacrifice, each alleyway shadowed by necessity. The hunt continues, and with it, the need for those willing to hunt the hunters when hunting becomes something else entirely. This is Eileen's legacy, not peace, but protection, not victory, but vigilance, not an end to suffering, but someone willing to bear that suffering so others need not. And so concludes our deep dive into the tragic tale of Eileen the Crow, Hunter of Hunters. We've discovered a figure whose story embodies both the nobility and futility of duty in a world gone mad, whose sacrifice illuminates the price that honor demands in the face of cosmic indifference. The legacy of this forgotten guardian continues to influence Yharnam's hunters, reminding us that even in the darkest corners of existence, someone must be willing to bear the weight of necessary choices. Next time on Lore 2 RPG, we'll explore another forgotten figure from gaming's vast tapestry of tragic heroes and complex villains. Until then, keep exploring those epic tales, fellow adventurers, and remember that sometimes the greatest heroism lies not in grand gestures, but in quiet sacrifices made by those who ask for nothing in return. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Bloodborne's most mysterious protector, please give this video a like and subscribe for more comprehensive explorations of gaming's greatest stories. Your support helps us continue bringing you these detailed examinations of the characters and narratives that make gaming such a rich medium for storytelling. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the shadows of Yharnam, and we'll see you in the next adventure.